Welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Happy Thursday, everybody. One day closer to Friday and almost another week down of the 2026 offseason. We're getting one day closer to the college football season kicking off, but a lot of topics to cover before then, Brian. And what we're going to do today, now that rosters are for the most part finalized, there's going to be no more players entering the portal. Some late additions might happen, but for the most part, rosters are set. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, in part one of today's show, the best transfer portal classes. And we've broken them down by conference. We're going to talk Big Ten, SEC, the ACC, and wrap it all up with the Big 12. Before we do that, we're going to obviously talk about Notre Dame's portal class. This is a Notre Dame podcast after all. And then in part two and kind of three of today's show, we're going to be talking about which model works best and how the 2026 season is going to be very telling as to what might happen and what we might see in the future of college football. So very interesting show today. Obviously, the transfer portal is now a big part of success for teams, and you could argue it is now something that teams have to do to varying degrees. But it's a very interesting conversation. Where we're going to start with that, Brian, is Notre Dame, a team that has had a lot of success in the portal, although they're not bringing in classes of 25 to 30 guys in the portal. It has still been equally as successful for them and arguably a little bit more successful than some other programs.
Yeah, I mean, when we kind of dive into this conversation about portal classes, Trev, and we'll kick things off with Notre Dame because I view Notre Dame as a winner in the transfer portal. One of the, not like there's never like the winner. There's winners who won the transfer portal. It's some of the teams that we're going to talk about are not teams that had big classes. But it's, did you meet the needs with impact talent for whatever your portal needs were? Indiana's portal class this offseason was not nearly as big as the one they had when Curt Cignetti first came in, or even last year's, because your needs weren't as great. And when you look at Notre Dame, you're talking about a team that is loaded up with high school recruiting. The retention has really been outstanding, which is, it sounds kind of crazy when you think about the fact that they lost like 18 guys into the portal this offseason, but it's kind of like, with the exception of Josh Burnham, nobody they lost was going to play this year. Now, you could argue a great offseason from Jadon Blair could have him in the mix, and I would have loved to have seen that. But the staff didn't think that, and that's partly why he left. But everybody else that left was like third, fourth-string guys that just were about to get passed up real quick from the incoming number one ranked class. So you look at it and say, well, did Notre Dame bring in more guys than they lost? No. And as we evaluate, what you lost will factor into how successful your portal class was. It's more about, okay, did you lose starters? Well, they lost one. Did you replace them? Did you add in positions of need? Did you have, players that are going to come in and make an immediate impact, or are they just going to be role players? And when you look at Notre Dame's class, Trev, the needs were small. We said, I think it was like 6 to 8. Is what we said coming in, and they got 6 to 8. And, we thought they needed one receiver, they got 2. We said they needed at least one D tackle, they got 2. You lose Josh Burnham, you replace him with Keon Keeley. So I don't think they really have any needs in the secondary, maybe a nickel. They went out and got 2 corners. And then, of course, I would argue the biggest need in the portal outside of D tackle was kicker, and they went out and got a really good kicker. So, is there impact talent? Yes. Did you get good depth players, or did you get starters? Both. And did you get guys that can kind of come in right now and have proven production? And that answer is also yes. Now, that's not true for everybody they brought in. The receivers are not proven production, but on defense, you certainly did. And so you look at it and say, did Notre Dame hit their needs? Yes. Did they land impact talent and starter caliber players? Yes. Did they move the needle with their portal class? Yes. And that's going to be interesting. Like, you look at LSU, they lost 32 players. They added 40. So how do you properly evaluate LSU? It's what was the caliber of the players they lost, and what was the caliber of the players they added? What was the fit to the new coaching staff that they lost? What's the fit to the new coaching staff that they landed? Those things will all factor in. It's not just looking at who teams got. But when you look at Notre Dame, Trev, impact talent, met their needs, moved the needle with who this football team is going to be in 2026. They're a better roster coming out of the portal than going in, and that's saying something for a team that we thought had arguably the best roster in the country going into the portal season.
Oh, absolutely. And you brought up a really key point that I think gets lost in the mix of, who's bringing in which top transfer portal guy. This guy was a so and so star rated recruit on this service. But you brought up retention and keeping your portal losses to a minimum. And that's another great thing that Notre Dame did this offseason. And that's also a factor that we're looking at. There were some teams that we talked about that brought in some impact talent. What was that relative to the talent that they lost? Notre Dame had a top 5 roster going into portal season, and they maintain that. They don't just have a top 5 roster in the country right now, not 5th, because of Tion Gray and Francis Brew and DJ McKinney and Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter and guys like that. It's because they also kept Adon Schuler and Tay Johnson and Leonard Moore and CJ Carr and Anthony Knapp, and the list goes on and on and on. And that's another piece to this as well that we talked about quite a bit before the show started is, hey, there has to be some sort of balance. But what Notre Dame was able to do in the portal was exceptional. And they put themselves in a position where, with the exception of one, maybe 2 guys, they don't need relative to other programs. Okay, they went and got this talent in the portal. Now they have to pan out for Notre Dame to reach their full potential. Does this portal class help them and make the job a little bit easier of reaching your full potential? It absolutely does. But we've walked through scenarios before on the show and mailbag questions and buy-sell holds that, getting guys like Quincy Porter and Mylan Graham is exciting. Bringing in very talented receivers, highly touted recruits coming out of high school to continue to develop in South Bend. Worst case scenario, they don't work out, but then it's somebody like a Cam Williams could step up, a Caden Finley, a Micah Gilbert, a Logan Saldate. So that's another thing that I love about this class as well, is it adds top-level talent, but they're not in a position where it's in previous years. I mean, if Riley Leonard didn't work out in South Bend, it's like, all right, like, I don't know if they make a championship run. This year, it's not as high stakes on the table with this portal class either.
Yeah, I mean, you also have to look at the fact that Notre Dame, as Marcus Freeman has said, is still going to live through high school recruiting. And you're talking about a staff that brought in, what did it end up being, 28 high school kids? Or was it 29? I think it ended up being 29.
29.
The 26 original, right? Wasn't it 26 original? Then you added Teddy Gerard. Then you added Jasper Scaife. And then you added Micah Drescher, the kicker. So it ended up being like 29 kids, including, 2 specialists. And so it was a highly ranked class, not just based on volume, but also based on just overall, like, per player rankings for skill play. I mean, all that stuff graded out very high. And that's why Notre Dame didn't have those same needs. And here's the crazy thing, Trev. Notre Dame is still a relatively young team, which is kind of wild because they don't really like, there's not a lot of players that are out of eligibility after this season. Quarterback is not. None of the running backs are. Receiver Jordan Faison is the only one out of eligibility after the season. Tight end Ty Washington, I think, is the only guy out of eligibility. Offensive line, I think it's Ashton Craig, and that, I believe, is it. Defensive line, it's Jason Onye, and I believe that's it. Linebacker, it's Jalen Sneed and Drake Bowen, I think, are the only players that are out of eligibility there. I'm actually going through like, why am I not using our scholarship chart? Yeah, there's literally no quarterbacks, no running backs, 1 receiver, 1 tight end, 1 offensive lineman, no defensive ends, 2 defensive tackles, Onye and Elijah Hughes, 2 linebackers, Sneed and Bowen, 1 safety, Luke Talich, 2 corners, Christian Gray and DJ McKinney. That's it. That's literally the only thing on the roster that is gone that has to be gone after this year. That's it, including the portal class, which lends to why they didn't have the big numbers. And despite the 18 departures from the roster through the portal class, with the addition of the 8 more, they're still at 100 kids on the roster, scholarship players in the roster. It's a big roster, and it's a deep roster and a talented roster. I have a feeling next year the portal needs might be a little bit greater, but this year they are not. And so I think when you talk about winners, you start off with Notre Dame being one of the winners. Why are we starting off with Notre Dame? Is it because they had the best portal offseason? No, it's because we're a Notre Dame channel. And so we're going to talk about Notre Dame first. But that's what I like about this portal class, Trev, is impact plus meeting needs. And look, it also shows it doesn't matter how you start. It matters how you finish, because I would have not have guessed we'd be sitting here having this conversation after the first 4 or 5 days of the portal.
No, I did not expect that either. I mean, we talked about that smaller sample size with the defensive tackle room. You know, I mean, first week of January is like, okay, you've got to close on one of Xavier Gilliam, or you hope to all things holy that you get Francis Bruin. And not only do they get Francis Bruin, Armel Mukum elects to withdraw his name from the portal, and then you go and get Tion Gray, and then you also add Keon Keeley to the edge as well. So definitely about how you finish. But Brian, you answered some of the important questions. Did they have a top class or not? Yes, we believe that based on the talent that they brought in and the needs that they filled, it is a top level class. Does this class move the needle? You answered that question as well, but combine those things together, and you look at this roster as a whole and what the transfer portal class adds to it. How important is the 2026 portal class to Notre Dame reaching the full potential of winning a national championship?
Incredibly important. The needs weren't great numbers-wise, but the needs for at least one position, especially, I would argue two, were significant. D tackle, you had to hit it. If you're going into the season with Jason Onye, Elijah Hughes, and then all the young players, could it have been good enough to win a championship? Maybe. If Chris Burgess pans out, if Davion Dixon and Sean Sevillano take steps, if Cole Mullen's that guy, if Tiki Hole and Elijah Golden can help you, there's a lot of ifs for the arguably the most important position on your defense. Because as we've always said, if you can't win up the middle, you're not going to be a championship defense. That would have been tough. That would have been real tough. So you had to get at least one guy out of the portal. You got two that have starting potential. One, I think, will start. The other, I think Tion Gray's probably like rotating in behind Jason Onye. But getting those two guys to go with what comes back, now you look at the D tackle position, like, okay, that's good enough to win a championship when you look at what they have everywhere else. So, yeah, I don't think Notre Dame could have – like, I don't know that I would have the confidence to say that Notre Dame has the best roster in college football if they didn't have a good portal class. Same thing at receiver. Like, did you need those guys? Not really, from the standpoint of, well, if Cam Williams pans out, if Micah Gilbert can stay healthy and pans out, if Elijah Burris is what we think he is, if Logan Saldate can step up, if Caden Finley can help as a freshman, if well, you added two more ifs. If Quincy Porter, but they're two really talented ifs. And my whole thing is the odds of you having success are greater if you have 6 talented ifs as opposed to 3 talented ifs. Your chances of getting 2 to 3 of those guys to pan out is much greater when it's 6, 7, 8 talented ifs as opposed to 3 or 4 or 5. You know what I mean? Like, the more talent you add, the greater chance you have at getting the talent and the production you need. So now it's like, it's not if Quincy Porter doesn't pan out, they're screwed. Or if Mylan Graham doesn't pan out, they're screwed. It's if Quincy Porter, Mylan Graham, Micah Gilbert, Cam Williams, Elijah Burris, Caden Finley, Logan Saldate all don't pan out, then they're only going to have Jordan Faison and Jaden Greathouse. What are the odds that none of them step up? And that's the thing. And then kicker, kicker's not a position you care about until you need it. Right? I mean, it's like, whatever, dude. They didn't have a game within 10 points. And then all of a sudden that kicker situation turned out to be pretty important in the Orange Bowl. You know, they won their first playoff game by 10. They won their second and missed a field goal. Won their second playoff game by 13. You had a chip shot field goal, a couple chip shot field goals. Those were important. But boy, 24-24 with 10 seconds left in the game, that field goal kicker looked pretty darn important. And that's kind of where you're at. And you got a guy that's very accurate and has proven in your stadium can go 3 for 3 on field goals and 3 for 3 on extra points. And on a not exactly like the prettiest day. Like, we all remember how sunny it was when he threw the touchdown pass to Malachi Fields, but it didn't stay that way for very long that day. But I think that one was important too. So, yeah, I think Notre Dame is coming out of the portal. Notre Dame improved their odds of being able to compete for a championship with the portal class significantly, in my opinion. And your elite secondary just got better.
It goes back to, yeah, man. I mean, it goes back to something that I brought up a couple of weeks ago when we were talking transfer portal classes. It increases their margin for error. That's what it does. I mean, the wide receiver room is light years ahead of where it was at going into 2022. Because 2022, we were having conversations about what? If Lorenzo Styles is who we think that he is, then the receiving core might be okay. And if he's not, this past game is going to struggle. How did 2022 pan out? Margin for error is huge when teams are competing for national championships. And who are we talking about here? A team that right now FanDuel has favored to win the national championship this year, ahead of teams like Ohio State and Texas and Georgia and Indiana, who just won a national championship. But I go back to the Ohio State roster in 2024. 2025 showed me how much margin for error there was for Ohio State's roster. And it wasn't even just for the transfer portal. This is just the margin of error conversation. Cody Simon was a great leader on that defense. What happens if he goes down? Arvell Reese steps in. Okay. What happens if Tyleek Williams goes down? Caden McDonald steps in. Okay. I think they'll be okay. That'll be all right. You know, like that's what's so different.
Yeah, like when they had some injuries at receiver, okay, you put Carnell Tate in the lineup. You know, this past year, you lose Jeremiah Smith, and you've got Mylan Graham and Quincy Porter, and now you don't have those guys, and now all of a sudden you're in a different spot. Look at Notre Dame in 2024 as well. You lose Ashton Craig and Billy Schrouth, and you've got Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler ready to step right into the mix. You lose Boubacar Traore, and you've got Josh Burnham ready to step into the mix. I mean, having depth is so incredibly important, Trevor. And we saw, Indiana shockingly stayed relatively healthy this year, but they weren't completely unscathed. EJ Williams had some moments where he wasn't healthy. Their defense had a couple guys get banged up this year, and it just like they didn't miss a beat. Depth is so incredibly important. And I think part of the reason Indiana didn't have as many injuries is because they do have a lot of depth.
Yeah.
They do play 5 receivers every game, and they do play 2-3 running backs every game. And I think that's certainly they rotate in their defensive line a bunch. That helps a ton.
Well, and that's why I love, and it doesn't get talked about as much because it's not, the Tion Gray, the Francis Brew, the 2 receivers from Ohio State. But that's why I also love what they did in the secondary. It was very easy to look at the room that Mike Mickens constructed and say, okay, like this is the best cornerback tandem arguably returning in the country, the best arguable safety tandem returning in the country. They're good. Well, Brian, what have we seen the last couple of seasons? Since 2023, at least one of Notre Dame's premier corners have missed at least a game due to injury. Leonard Moore missed games last year. Christian Gray missed, I believe, a game or 2 last year. Cam Hart missed a game in 23. We obviously know what happened with Ben Morrison in 24. And you did have young guys.
And Christian missed a game in 24. Both years preseason. So Christian missed a game this year. Leonard missed 2 this year. Christian missed a game the year before. He missed the Louisville game. And then Benjamin went down for the season after game 6. After game 6. 2023, they played the Pitt game with no Benjamin Morrison. And then Cam Hart got knocked out that game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. The last 3 years, they've lost at least one game from a corner. And in the last 2 years, both starters have missed a game.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I love what they went out and did in the portal, because what did they have to rely on the last couple of years? True freshmen. Now, I have all the confidence in the world in Aiden Pouncey and Kari Adams, but do you want to have to continually rely on true freshmen to step in? You factor in the fact that Mike Mickens is now gone. What did that portal class do for you once again? It increased the margin for error, because now instead of having to, all right, Aiden Pouncey or Kari Adams, I just hope you're ready to start this game against North Carolina on the road. Hope you're ready. Now you have somebody, and saying that, I do have confidence that they will be, but now again, your margin for error increases, and you have guys like Jaden Sanders and DJ McKinney who are also able to step in. So I love what this portal class did for this team, Brian. It all looks different as we're getting ready to dive into, but very excited to see what that's going to look like for them.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think Notre Dame has found their sweet spot here with the portal under Marcus Freeman, which is retention is key, high school recruiting is key, And if we can find difference makers in the portal, let's go get them. They got nice like role players the first few years in the portal. I mean, they weren't really like game changers. It was guys that Javion, Javante Jean-Baptiste. It was Thomas Harper, like good complementary players, like guys that you were glad you needed. Quarterback, obviously, you had that. But what they've done the last 2 years is they went out and raised the bar on the caliber of non-quarterbacks they're bringing in. When you look at Malachi Fields, for example, last year, when you look at this class with Quincy Porter, Mylan Graham, Francis Brew, Tion Gray, DJ McKinney, they're raising the quality of the portal players they're bringing in. Not the past guys weren't good players. They were. Jordan Clark was a very good player. Thomas Harper was a very good player. Devontae Smith. And you're still bringing in the depth players as well. But I think they've really raised the bar, and that's the big thing. As we wrap this up and get ready to talk about other portal winners, I think obviously we wanted to spend a little bit more time on Notre Dame because this is, in fact, a Notre Dame channel. But you can look nationally. Like David Pollock yesterday had something on the 7 or 8 teams he thought won the portal. He said Notre Dame because I think David Pollock understands it's not just about numbers. It's like what kind of talent do you get, and are you meeting the need? The few when you're as talented as Notre Dame is, you don't have a lot of needs in the portal, and they met them all plus some. Plus they got a little couple cherries on top as well.
Brian, let's kind of switch over and talk big picture national view, and we're going to break this down by conference. We're going to start with the Big Ten, transition to the SEC, talk ACC, and then the Big 12. And when we talk portal classes out of the Big Ten, it's kind of hard not to start with Indiana, a team that is fresh off of a national championship. They've been a hot topic of conversation due to the transfer portal. But what we did is we took a look at all of these conferences to say, okay, which teams did we believe in each conference who had kind of like the top 4 portal classes? And we're starting with the Indiana Hoosiers because they once again did a heck of a job in the portal.
Just a reminder on kind of what we're doing here as well is I looked at some of the portal class rankings as we were putting this together, and it was kind of like, okay, yeah, we're going to follow a different model. We're not going to go with the whole, volume is better kind of thing. The other thing that we take into account is who you lost, what was the caliber of players you lost, and did you meet your needs and add impact players? And so a class with 8 like Notre Dame's could be as impactful for Notre Dame as a class with 32 or 40 or whatever the case may be. And we're also not basing this off of high school evaluations as much as that's kind of part of it. But like if a guy's been in college for 2 or 3 years and he hasn't done a whole lot, you have to take that into consideration. And so we've seen some classes that are getting a lot of hype from like On3 because they're ranking a guy that's a junior with 2 career sacks, highly because he's and look, we'll use Notre Dame as an example. The fact that Quincy Porter ranked 66 spots ahead of Francis Brew is based entirely on high school rankings. Now, it has nothing to do with what they've done at college, right? We're basing this also on what guys have done at college. So when we start with the Big Ten, you look at Indiana, they only brought in 17 guys this year. It's not nearly as great as what they've done in the past. And I think that's because what you're seeing is Indiana doesn't have as many needs as they've had in the past. There's a lot of talk about what Indiana lost, Trev, and they certainly lost some good football players. I mean, you lose the Heisman Trophy winner. I'd say it's a big loss.
Yeah,
you're losing your 2 running backs. You're losing Elijah Sherratt to the NFL. You're losing Omar Cooper to the NFL. You're losing Pat Coogan to graduation. Your right tackle's gone. You're losing Mikhail Kamar. You're losing Stephen Daly. You're losing Aiden Fisher. You're losing D'Angelo Ponce to the NFL. So you lost some really good football players. But there's a lot coming back. Charlie Becker comes back. You've got 3 of your 3 of your 5 starting offensive linemen come back. Both your D tackle come back. You have 2 linebackers that had starter snaps last year and starter impact last year. You've got 2 of your starting defensive backs coming back. So there were clearly some holes. So you look at it and say, okay, you needed a really good quarterback to replace Fernando Mendoza. Check. And Josh Hoover. Absolute check. You needed a running back to help fill the void left by losing, Hemby and Black from this last season. So you've already got Lee Beebe. That gives you 1. You don't necessarily need 2, but you need 1. And they went out and got one of our favorite running backs in the portal, Turbo Richard, who we're very high on. He had a solid year last year running behind just a abysmal offensive line at Boston College. I mean, that offense was just an absolute train wreck. And the film is much better than the production. But even with the bad offensive line, he still averaged 5.2 yards per carry. The whole team averaged 3.3, but Turbo averaged 5.2. And then the year before, Turbo averaged 5.1 as a freshman. He's a productive player. I think he fits their system well. All their running backs are these like little short, sawed-off guys that just hammer up through the line, great vision, great feet. That's exactly what Turbo is, like 5'8", 200 pounds. So you got to check there. You needed at least one impact receiver out of the transfer portal, and you got one, and I would argue maybe two. It depends on what Shaz Preston can do, coming out of the portal. He's a guy that was a highly ranked recruit. I believe he signed with LSU or Alabama, one of the two, coming out of high school, transfers to Tulane and becomes an impact player. They obviously got Nick Marsh out of Michigan State, who's had two very good productive seasons in the Big Ten, was the top pass catcher for Michigan State the last 2 years, has been over 600 yards the last 2 years in a system where it's kind of like he was the guy that everybody's focused on. They went out and got Shaz Preston, who can play the slot. He had 43 catches for 723 yards last year. And, Trev, he's a guy that has playoff experience. He had 5 catches for 125 yards against Ole Miss last year. He had 3 catches for 95 yards in their win over Duke last year. So this is a kid that's talented, former top recruit. So, again, check there. You lose Pat Coogan and you lose your right tackle. So what do? You move Bray Lynch into center. You go out and get Joe Bruner at guard from Wisconsin, who was an all Big Ten player last year. Check. You lose your 2 defensive ends who are really good players. So you need to go get some guys. They got 3. They got Josh Burnham, which is a very good pickup. It's not getting talked about nearly enough with how clutch Josh Burnham was. They also got Toby Onsensanmi from Kansas State, good football player. They got Chidi Obiazer from Kansas State, good football player, 6'6", 245-pound edge rusher. I think those guys are going to help be able to fill that void with the 2 tackles coming back. They got A.J. Harris out of the portal at cornerback to help replace D'Angelo Ponce. Very different player. They got Preston Zachman out of the portal from Wisconsin. So you look at it, Trevor, everywhere where they lost an NFL player, they either had somebody in the depth chart ready to step right in, or they went out and got a good, proven portal player to replace them. I think Indiana had a heck of a portal class this year. And that's why I had no problem leaving them number 1 in my preseason top 25, and why you still had them as a top, I think you had them 6th, 5th, 4th. That's right. It's not based on reputation. It's based on they're still really good.
Absolutely. They had another home run type of portal cycle. Again, like you listed off, they checked off every single need. And they're making, and something, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself here, but they're slowly starting to make that transition to doing what other top programs do, is they're using the portal more to supplement than to build the foundation of their team. And that's something I'm very interested to see if Curt Cignetti can continue doing. But love the portal pickups here. To your point, Josh Burnham is one that isn't getting talked about enough. A lot of the attention is going to Josh Hoover and Nick Marsh, and I understand that. But winning a national championship is not just because of who you have at quarterback and who you have at receiver. You need impact defensive end.
Just go watch what Josh did, that big stop he had on 2nd down near the goal line against Penn State. Look at how good he played against Georgia in the playoffs 2 years ago. And then the fact is I mean, you could make a strong case that he was their best defensive lineman the last 5 games last year for Notre Dame. That's a great pickup for Indiana. So they absolutely were a portal winner. I would argue that they had the best portal class in the Big Ten. I would contend that. Impact talent, meeting needs, all of it. And they added some depth. It wasn't just those guys. They added 17 players. They went out and got some special teams guys. They got some guys that are going to give you, Carson Williams is not coming in to start. He's coming in to provide depth. You got a D tackle from Tulsa, not to come in and start, but to give you depth. Brock Schott, not much of a pass catcher at Indiana, or Miami, but they're not asking their tight ends to do that. They ask their tight ends to block. Jaquan Sanks from Cincinnati, good depth player. So they added starter impact and depth in their portal class and didn't really lose anybody of note. You could argue Hosea Wheeler was about the only guy that they lost that was going to be coming into the season really fighting for a chance to start. Actually, he wasn't even going to do that with a chance to be in the rotation this year. So big check, A grade for the Hoosiers.
Another team in the Big Ten that had a really good portal cycle were the Wisconsin Badgers, a team that Notre Dame is gearing up to face in week 1 of the regular season. And I was a little biased to them a little bit. One, they're on Notre Dame's schedule, and two, I just got done doing their portal breakdown for their opponent preview. But I go through and I look at what they did, especially relative to the conference, and they had a very underrated portal cycle, Brian. Love them going out and picking up Colton Joseph, the Old Dominion quarterback, who put up a lot of numbers last season for Old Dominion. I mean, he threw for 2,624 yards, rushed for another 1,000 yards. He had 34 total touchdowns last year as a freshman, a redshirt freshman. So
Redshirt.
They brought in a quarterback with a lot of needs. And if you guys watched any Wisconsin football last year, quarterback was definitely a position that struggled for the Badgers last year. That is something without a doubt. But they built around the entire backfield. They brought in Brian Jackson from USC. They brought in Abu Sama III from Iowa State. He was a very productive running back for them. Finished year with 732 yards, averaged 5.2 yards a carry, 5 rushing touchdowns. They had to do some rebuilding along the offensive line. They went out and got a center from Oklahoma State, Lucas Simmons from Florida State. So offensively, I think Wisconsin had a very strong portal cycle. And then I echoed the same thing on defense. They're trying to get longer. They're trying to get a little bit bigger. They went out and got Justice Boone from Arkansas. That's a player that Notre Dame went up against this past season. They also brought in reinforcements from the secondary. They got Bryce West from Ohio State. That's a very underrated pickup. Not the most productive player last year at Ohio State, but I sit and look, and when you're behind guys, I look at the Bryce West pickup for Wisconsin in a similar way that I look at, the Quincy Porter, Mylan Graham pickup for Notre Dame. Did he put up the most numbers? No, but who is he sitting behind?
Right.
And Bryce
Does
West
he
is
have
sitting
talent?
behind.
Right.
Exactly. Dude sitting behind Davison Igbinosun and Devin Sanchez and Jermaine Matthews, who's coming back. Really underrated pickup for Wisconsin's defense. And then they also went out and got Carson Van Dinter from Ohio State. From Iowa State. He's a safety. So loved a lot of the pickups of what Wisconsin brought in the portal. Checked a lot of boxes for me as well, Brian.
And they needed it because not only did they not have a great roster last year, but they lost a lot of guys in the portal as well. Like they were hit hard by the portal. Obviously, you expected kind of Billy Edwards to go. He got hurt early last year, and so you kind of expected that a little bit. But running back, you're bringing back your top guys. You don't necessarily need to add a bunch, but you still went upgraded at the position. You lost a receiver to the portal. You lost Tucker Ashcraft to USC, the tight end. You had Joe Bruner was an all Big Ten guard. He transferred to Indiana. They lost their best linebacker last year, transferred to Ohio State. They had a couple DBs. Emilio Agard transfers to Virginia. Jameer Latimer transfers to West Virginia. I mean, so they had losses. And so they needed to, and then obviously guys that graduated, they needed to have a good portal class, to your point, Trev. And they certainly did that. Colton Joseph, if you don't know a lot about him, is a really, really fun football player. You guys should get a chance to check him out. To Trev's point, he rushed for 1,000 yards last year and threw for over 2,600 yards last year. I'm very curious how he's going to fit into Jeff Lebby's offense, but I have to believe that they're going to adapt to what he does. Otherwise, why go get him? They've got quality talent at receiver. The offensive line is going to be the key. The kids they got, Austin Kowecki, Blake Cherry, PJ Wilkins, they're going to need at least one of those guys to be able to step in the starting lineup. But I really like what Wisconsin did. I do. They had one of the more solid portal classes. And like you said, some of them are proven players. Some of them are not. Their secondary class is mostly guys that they're kind of banking on having talent. I think they got 6 DBs from the portal. 4 of them have 3 years of eligibility left.
Yep.
I think that was smart as well, because they're not, okay, if they don't pan out this year, you're back to the portal again next year. These are guys that are going to be hopefully part of your rotation for years to come. I think that was very smart. Very smart.
I think so too. Yeah, the Colton Joseph pickup I really love. I mean, he was a big reason why Old Dominion played Indiana so close in week 1.
Oh, God, he was so good.
I mean, he was electric in that game, bro. Like it makes me wonder what he's going to do at Wisconsin with another year of starting under his belt. We were talking about it before the show. FanDuel put out their lines for some week 1 games. Right now, Notre Dame is favored by 17.5 points. And I'm sure if I'm Colton Joseph, I kind of look at some of those and maybe pull a Lee Corso not so fast. Maybe you want to make that a little bit closer.
The throwing piece will have to improve because you look at the Indiana game, Trev, he went 11 of 22 for 96 yards and 3 picks, and you're thinking, you guys just told us he was really good against Indiana. Yeah, that part wasn't good. What was good was the 10 carries for 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. That was the good part. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to have to get better, but I think that was that was his. I mean, he was a redshirt sophomore last year, but this is a kid that has had some moments as a passer as well. He's had, 1, 2, 3, 4 games of over 100 yards, of over 300 yards in his career. So there's potential there. And, against Virginia Tech last year, another D1 team, because you always got to be nervous about those G5 guys, right? And then that's why I like pointing to, okay, what'd they do against the best teams that they played? Well, Colton Joseph last year against Virginia Tech went 16 of 22 for 276 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks, and also rushed for 63 yards and a touchdown against Virginia Tech. Against James Madison last year, 13 of 21, 209 yards passing, 3 touchdowns, did get picked off twice. But, and they were able to do a good job of keeping him contained, running the football. But you look at some of those, Marshall, he had 266 passing yards and had 50 rushing yards and 3 total touchdowns. So, or 2 total touchdowns. So he's done well in some of their bigger moments also. And it's not just, okay, he put up a bunch of numbers against, App State and teams that weren't that good last year. So I think that's what I like there. But that was one of the more underrated in a year where there was a ton of portal quarterbacks to be discussed. He doesn't get a lot of oxygen. I think that was a strong pickup for the Badgers.
100%. Next team here in the Big Ten that we're going to talk about, Brian, is a team that I know that you're also high on. We were going through some of these teams, and it's the UCLA Bruins. They had a very underrated portal cycle, and there's a lot of attention going to, what Oregon did and Ohio State, the big names in the Big Ten. But UCLA quietly had one of the better portal cycles in the Big Ten this offseason so far.
Well, in a lot of ways, what you're seeing the new coach do is he's kind of following the method that we saw Curt Cignetti do. Not quite to the same degree. He didn't bring as many JMU players with him that Cignetti did, but he brought 7, and that includes Wayne Knight, who was a very good running back. There were some people talking about how he was getting looked at by Notre Dame. That was not true. I think that was more of an agent thing. I think that was Notre Dame doing their homework on him, but not necessarily saying this is a guy that we want, but this is a guy last year in Wayne Knight that, rushed for over 1,300 yards. He rushed for 110 yards in the bowl game and the playoff game against Oregon. He ran for 212 yards in the conference championship game against Troy. This is a good football player. And you get him, you got some of the other, top players from JMU in the portal class. You got Aiden Mizell, who's a fast kid, hasn't proven himself yet, but he's got a lot of speed. You got him from the portal. So, you look at what UCLA did, they had to rebuild their depth chart from the portal. So part of this was out of necessity, but did they do a good job with it? Yeah, they did a good job with it. They got guys that are going to come in, Trev, right away and be instant playmakers. And fortunately for them, they did not need to go out and get a quarterback, which would have made it interesting. But, you had to completely remake your receiver room. Well, you did that. You got Landon Ellis from JMU, who's the top pass catcher for JMU. You got Aiden Mizell, as I talked about. You got Samaj Morgan from Michigan, who's played for them. You got Leland Smith from San Jose State, who had really good numbers last season. So I like what they did. I think they got guys that have produced. You brought in Aiden Gobira for Notre Dame people. That's a former Notre Dame player who was a good player for JMU last year. They got Tyson Ford out of the portal, and hopefully he can figure something out. I'm not expecting him to, but it'd be nice if he could kind of get something done. You got Amir Washington, who was a solid rotation player for Texas Tech this past season. So I really like what they did. I really do. They got a talented linebacker from whose name I can't pronounce, from Oklahoma, to come in, which they needed because they lost their top 2 linebackers last year. They returned some good secondary players and went out and got some good secondary players. I'm really curious to see if Malik Hartford can kind of find a role at UCLA. He was buried behind really good players at Ohio State. Loved him coming out of high school, top 100 player. But he just hasn't been able to kind of find a way at Ohio State because he's been buried. But you're like, the kid's still talented. Can he find that way out at UCLA? I love pickups like that. Teo Johnson's a proven player. DJ Barksdale was a really good player for JMU. 10 pass breakups last year for JMU. as their nickel. Good football player. So I really like what UCLA did in the portal. They don't get a lot of love because it's UCLA and they brought some bunch of G5 kids, but I really think that it's Chesney, right? For some reason I was drawing a blank on his name. But I think Bob Chesney is kind of looking at the model that Kurt Cignetti used, which is get some of the best G5 players you can get. Find some talented, but just, if you're going to get a Power 5 guy, find a guy that maybe was young and talented, didn't get that opportunity, or a guy that's been injured a lot, like they did with EJ Williams out of the portal from Clemson, hadn't played really a lot in a while. I think that's kind of what I look at when I see Aid Mizell. So I love their strategy, and I think they brought in a big class of guys that are going to come in hungry and looking forward to their opportunities.
One of the things I love that UCLA did in the portal it was very intentional. You go and you look at who they play in 2026. They play Oregon on the road. They play Michigan on the road. They play USC at home. They play Michigan State at home. What do a lot of those teams have, Brian? They have a lot of size. And what did UCLA go do in the portal? They added a lot of size. Tyson Ford is 6'5", 300 pounds. They went and got Malik Hartford, to your point. He's a 6'2", 200-pound safety. You see it going down the list. They get Maxwell Roy, a depth piece on the defensive line. He's 6'3", 300 pounds. They get Amir Washington from Texas Tech. He's 6'2", 270. And it's just consistent down the line. So very interested to see what they do there. But I love when teams like that, teams like UCLA, the middle tier Power 4 teams, you run the risk, especially with a new head coach, of just trying to attract the biggest names. And you avoid the fit of what they're going to be on your roster and what it means for you schematically. Love USC's intent or UCLA's intention in the portal here too.
Which is the mistake that Deshaun Foster made. They just went after big names. And I don't think the culture was all that great.
100%.
But I think this was a much, much better move. This next team, Trev, is a very intriguing team to talk about.
Very. And we're talking about the Penn State Cyclones. And when you go and you look at what they did, obviously they bring in Matt Campbell, the former head coach at Iowa State. But then obviously they brought in a lot of pieces from Iowa State with him, as he should. I understand the move there. And this class is headlined by Rocco Becht and having a quarterback come back. I ranked them in my preseason top 25, looking at the schedule that they're going to play. I think Rocco Becht is going to play a factor. But in a way, because it's not the G5 to P4 transition that we're talking about Bob Chesney making or what Kurt Cignetti made a couple seasons ago, but this is a similar-ish model. We're going to talk about another ACC team with Penn State ties that also had a similar path here in the transfer portal, bringing in players that you have familiarity with, surrounding it with players that understand the system. But Penn State is a very interesting team to talk about when it comes to the portal here, Brian.
I think I counted there's at least 22 players in the portal from Iowa State that they brought over. And obviously Rocco Becht's the headliner, but he's not the only key player. What makes Penn State's class challenging to evaluate is this. There's a lot of talk when they rank them as a top team of what they added and not nearly enough talk about what they lost. And that's why I don't think they're the top winner in the Big Ten, but I think you can't ignore what they've done. I mean, you not only lose Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton, but you also lost Corey Smith, who transferred. You lose Ethan Grunkmeyer, who transfers to Virginia Tech, because we're going to talk in a little bit about the Virginia Tech Nittany Lions a little bit. You already lost your top 3 pass catchers to graduation, and then you lose Tyseer Denmark to the transfer portal, Caden Saunders to the transfer portal. You lose Luke Reynolds to the transfer portal. You lose Andrew Olesh, your stud freshman, who had a chance to be a really good player there, to the transfer portal. You lose one of your starting offensive linemen to the transfer portal. You lose a bunch of defensive players either to the portal, like you had Zariah Fisher goes to USC, Xavier Gilliam goes to Tennessee, Chaz Hamilton goes to Tennessee, Jalen Harvey goes to North Carolina, Owen Wafel goes to Duke, Eni White goes to Oklahoma State, Malachi Williams goes to Virginia Tech. You lost Caleb Artis to Temple, on top of losing denied Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant to graduation, on top of losing Alonzo Ford to graduation. You lost Amari Campbell to Tennessee. You lost Zakee Wheatley to the NFL. You lost King Mack to the portal, A.J. Harris to the portal, DeJuan Lane to the portal, Elliott Washington to the portal. I mean, they were absolutely ravaged and they needed a strong portal class. So there's a little bit of give and take. I think they did enough in the portal to do two things that I really like. Bringing over a bunch of your own players allows you to establish a culture immediately. Because, look, man, this is a brand new team. Half our team from last year is gone. So it's easier for Rocco Becht and the Iowa State kids to come in and show leadership and be kind of the focal point. Just like what Signetti did, those kids know what your expectations are. You don't need a bunch of, like when Al Golden came in, who was the leader on the team in the first week of practices that was going to be able to explain what Al Golden wanted from them preparation-wise, scheme-wise, practice-wise? Nobody. They were all learning it on the fly. Now you've got players that know who Matt Campbell is, know what makes him happy, know what makes him not happy, and they know about the culture he's trying to establish. That's why he did that. And while I don't think it's going to have this, like, they're going to win the Big Ten, kind of thing, and I don't have in my preseason top 25, they will be better next year than they were this year because of it. And so I think that was the why it made sense. And getting Rocco Becht was huge. Carson Hansen was their leading rusher last year. They got Brett Eskeldson out of Iowa State, and Chase Sewell, 2 500-yard receivers from Iowa State last year. They got their top 2 tight ends from Iowa State last year. Both came in. So, they got 2 starting offensive linemen. I think Boer started last year too, I believe. Maybe 1 starting offensive lineman from Iowa State. So you had needs, Trev, and they were able to fill some of those needs with guys from, your entire starting linebacking core from Iowa State transferred to Penn State. You know what I mean? So that helps, but they needed to also go outside of Iowa State, and they were able to find some players that weren't from Iowa State as well.
Yeah, those are some of the other pickups that I really like. You bring in James Peoples from Ohio State to help with the running back situation. You convinced, I believe his name's Cam Wallace, I think. He was another running back that initially entered the transfer portal. You convinced him to come back. So you have somewhat of a 1-2 punch there with James Peoples and Cam Wallace.
And
I like the Keanu Williams. Yep. I like the Keanu Williams.
Obviously from Iowa State too. So, you're very deep at running back again. You're not as talented as you were last year, but now you have very good depth.
Very. I like the Keanu Williams pickup from UCLA. He started every single game this past season except for on the road against Indiana, and he still played 36 snaps in that game. Very experienced, massive dude. He's 6'5", 320 pounds. He's definitely used as a run plugger. So is he going to be Zane Durant? I don't know, nor do I think so. Is he going to be Zane Durant? But from a checking the box standpoint of filling needs, Keanu Williams steps in, and he has experience starting in the Big Ten. You bring him over to Penn State. I like that move as well. So as fun as it is to joke around, and I will probably still continue to do it and call them the Penn State Cyclones for how many Iowa State players they brought over with them, they were still able to add other pieces similar to what Kurt Signetti did coming to Indiana. Yes, he brought James Madison guys with him, but he also brought Old Dominion guys. And then the following year, he got a center from Notre Dame and a receiver from Clemson. And so there's
quarterback from Cal, quarterback from Ohio. Right.
So definitely other pieces here.
Receiver from Clemson. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that Penn State did overall. There was nothing that, here's why I don't punish them as much for what was lost as I would a normal coach. I don't punish first-year coaches as much for losing players as I do when a coach who's returning loses his roster to the portal. And so you were going to lose those players. There was nothing Matt Campbell could do about it. And all those guys were gone before you even hired because of how bungled the process was. And I think he made the most of it and recovered quite nicely. I'd be shocked if Penn State's not a bowl team next year. Shocked. I would not. Before Matt Campbell's hired, you're like, dude, I don't know if they're going to win a game next year. They're going to lose their entire roster, and everyone else has hired a coach except for them. You know what I mean? It's like, how are they going to be? And to come in as late as he did, I think it was very impressive for them to be able to finish the way that they were. That's why I give them a little bit of brownie points. I don't know if I'd rank their class as high as some other people rank their class, but I think they certainly had one of the better off seasons in the Big Ten in that regard.
Absolutely. I wouldn't put them in the top 10 across college football, but they're definitely sniffing top 15 in terms of what they did and who they brought in. So I'm with you there. Let's transition over to the SEC, Brian. And there's kind of two teams that really stick out at the top here, and then two others that we're going to cover as well. But first team we're going to talk about here is the LSU Tigers. And they hired Lane Kiffin after they got rid of Brian Kelly, which was obviously the correct move for what they needed to do as a program moving forward. But Lane Kiffin is a head coach that we talked about yesterday, has a lot of familiarity with building programs through the transfer portal. He did it with Ole Miss back-to-back seasons. One year they go, 10-2, they miss the playoffs. And then the next year I know obviously without Lane Kiffin, but make the college football playoff semifinals with a roster that he assembled. And they had their best season in program history. So strong portal cycle for LSU this offseason.
It is. They're the epitome of you have to gauge what they lost with what they added. Because they lost 32 players and added 40. So it's only a +8 difference. But when I look at what they lost, I'm not in love with what they lost. I don't think what they lost is going to kill them. There's some guys that other teams are taking some of their guys. And you and I were talking about this. There was a team that people keep saying had a really good portal season, and they're banking it on this LSU kid who gave up 15 pressures in 8 games. You know what I mean? Well, why? Because he was a talented high school kid, highly ranked high school kid. It wasn't very good for LSU last year, but they lost some potential, they lost some talent, but you needed to completely rebuild the culture there too. And I don't know, not that Lane Kiffin is going to bring like this really dynamic culture. I don't know if that's going to be the case, but you needed to purge as much of the Brian Kelly influence as you could. So when you look at LSU, you needed a quarterback. You went out and got look, I don't think he's the best quarterback in the portal. I think he's overrated from that regard, but there's two types of overrated. One is overrated, which means you're not good. The other one is overrated. You're a good football player, but you're not quite as good as what people make him out to be. That's Sam Leavitt to me. Is he overrated? Yes. Is he still a good football player? Yeah, he freaking led his team to the playoffs 2 years ago. He's a good football player. He's not the 5-star number 1 quarterback in the portal, which is why they went after Damon Williams as hard as they did before they went to Sam Leavitt. Take all that aside. Did they add a good quarterback? Yes, they did. Did they add an experienced quarterback? Yes, they did. Most importantly, they added a kid who should thrive in that system. And on top of that, you went out and got Hassan Longstreet, who's your quarterback of the future now from the portal, who will be a redshirt freshman next year for USC and is a kid that's got some talent. You already had, in my opinion, and this is going to sound, a little nuts. People are going to disagree with me. The two best running backs coming back in the SEC are no doubt Ahmad Hardy from Missouri and Kawan Lacey from Ole Miss. Would you agree with that? I still think the best 1-2 punch is arguably the two kids from LSU from a talent standpoint. They were it was coaching malpractice how much they failed those two kids last year. I mean, we're watching Harlan Berry rip A&M up in the first half. In the second half, he has 1 carry. You know what I mean? That you've already got that. And then on top of that, you went and added Dylan Jones from Wisconsin. You added Rod Gainey from LSU. You added Stacey Gage from UCF. You added Racine Guillory. Those are solid, good depth players that can also help you on special teams. You literally have 1 receiver coming back from last year. 1. And you went out and got Jackson Harris from Hawaii, who was previously at Stanford, had almost 1,000 yards last year. You and I have been talking about J.C. Brown for a year. You got Trey Brown from Old Dominion, very good big play guy. You got Malik Elzy, who's a big-bodied rotation player. You got Eugene Wilson. The only knock on Eugene Wilson is, can he stay healthy? When he's healthy, he's very good. And then, of course, you've got some high school kids coming in. Tight ends, you're already good there, but then you went out and got Malachi Thomas to help give you more depth. You've got J.C. Anderson coming in as a high school kid. Your offensive line is going to look very different. You got 2 starters coming back. You had backups transferring. But I didn't think a lot of those guys were very good, to be completely honest with you. You go out into the portal, you get Jordan Seaton. You and I have talked about, very talented. Performance has not lived up to the talent yet. But that was also as a true freshman and true sophomore. He's going to start hitting his peak now in 2026 and 2027. Aluba is a very good pickup from Maryland. You got Sean Tompkins from Baylor, solid depth player. Darren Stray gives you depth. Devin Harper's a guy that knows his system should slide right in as a starting guard. So you did a sneaky job there, in my opinion. your defensive line was very overrated last year. You went out, and you and I said this in the offseason. You went out and got a bunch of guys who are, like everybody kept trying to tell us that Patrick Payton was this great pickup. And we're like, no, he wasn't. And look what he did. He had like 1 sack last year. And you go out and get Jordan Ross, talented player. He's got some tools, but he's got to figure some things out. But you got Princewell Umanmielen, best guess at that, 11-sack guy from Ole Miss last year. You went out and got Stephylon Green, who gives you depth. Now some young guys, Jack Pyburn, I believe, is back. I believe he's back, correct? Isn't he coming back for LSU this year? Pyburn? The kid they got from Florida. I could be wrong on that. You got Don McKinley coming back. Gabriel Relaford's coming back. You've had some young players that should Damian Shanklin's a guy that we're familiar with. To go with those guys. That's still my biggest question mark there is that position, is D-line, but you did get some good players. TJ Daugherty for linebackers, a good pickup. And I like their portal pickups. They got Fahim Delane from Ohio State, who gives them good depth. And then they got Ty Benefield, who gives them some attitude at safety. Ty Benefield is going to come down and smack people. But you really didn't need a lot of help in the secondary because you've got DJ Pickett coming back, who's going to be a star. You've got Tamarcus Cooley coming back. You got P.J. Woodland coming back. Jakeem Johnson hopefully will be healthy. And you've also got a really good freshman class coming in led by Havon Finney. So I think LSU overall did a very good job of rebuilding their roster with guys who can come in and make an impact day one. Now, how quickly can it bring the culture together and the team together to play together? That may take a year or two, and it has for him in the past, but it's hard to argue with this. And here's the other thing I like, Trev. A lot of the guys they brought in are multi-year guys. Of the receivers they brought in, J.C. Brown's the only one that's out of eligibility after the season. The tight end they brought in from Pitt's got 3 years left. You look at the offensive line. Devin Harper, they got from Ole Miss, has eligibility left. The only O-lineman they have that's out of eligibility is the kid from Maryland, Aluba. Defensive line-wise, the kid from Ole Miss, Princewell's gone after this year, but Jordan Ross has 3 years left. Stephylon Green has 2 years left. TJ Daugherty's out of eligibility, but your entire secondary outside of Ty Benefield, all those pickups are guys with multiple years. So I think there was some strategic aspects to that as well, where you're bringing guys in with multiple years. Sam Levitt has multiple years as well. He's always struck me as a kid who's looking for the fastest path to the NFL. So if he has a good year under Lane Kiffin, he probably leaves, but that's why you bring in Hassan Longstreet. So I think the strategy was very sound, and I think they hit it. They hit it very well in the portal.
Agreed. I echo all the same sentiments that you do about LSU. Again, it was another intentional portal cycle. Very happy with what they brought in. Insured by Big, I'm sure you're also happy about what LSU brought into the portal as well. Next team that we're talking about here in the SEC, Brian, is the Texas Longhorns. Another one of those kind of no-brainer teams that we looked at in the SEC, and a little bit different story than LSU. They didn't have to overhaul an entire roster and replace it, find a new way to lay the foundation of a culture. Is a smaller class size. LSU brought in 40 players. Texas brought in 18. But how are we evaluating this? What did you lose? Did you bring in impact talent? Did you fill needs? And I think Texas also checks a lot of those boxes as well. They were already going to have an extremely talented roster returning in 2026, and they used the transfer portal to supplement and then enhance it. And I'm really happy with what Texas did.
Yeah. I mean, you say they got 18 guys, but they didn't bring in 18 guys to start. You didn't bring in MJ Morris to push Arch Manning. You brought in MJ Morris to give you depth. You've got KJ Lacey and Dia Bell, who are all young guys. You brought in MJ Morris to give you depth. So, look, I think that when you look at what Texas did, no, they didn't have a lot of needs. They lost also some really good players. They lost Trey Owens, who I didn't love as much as some other people did coming out of high school, but you lose Q Wisner transfers to Florida State. CJ Baxter transfers to Kentucky. Christian Clark transfers to South Carolina. A receiver, DeAndre Moore, transfers to Colorado. Parker Livingston goes to Oklahoma. Jamie French leaves, goes to Michigan. At tight end, Jack Andrews is gone. He's to the NFL. Jordan Washington transfers. Offensive line-wise, you lose 2 graduates. You have some depth players transfer out. Defensive line-wise, Ethan Burt graduates. Cole Brevard graduates. Travis Shaw graduates. Linebacker Anthony Hill goes pro. Trey Moore is done. The Lufau kid transfers to Colorado. Bo Barnes transfers to Kentucky. You lose your top 2 DBs to the portal. I mean, to the NFL. Jalen Gilbo goes to the NFL. Like, you know what I mean? Like, they lost a lot of good players. And I think they were more strategic than a class with 18 might appear to be. And so part of the reason that they lost some of the receivers was why? Because they were going to go out and try to get a guy like Cam Coleman. They were going to try to make a splash there. You know, you lose Wisner and Baxter, and I would argue that they're going to be better at running back this year than they were with those 2 guys. They're nice players, but I never thought they were great players. You get Raleek Brown, who's a 1,000-yard rusher last year at Arizona State. You get Hollywood Smothers, who's a very good football player. You know, yeah, you lose DeAndre Moore for Parker Livingston, but there's not a person on the planet that wouldn't trade those 2 for Cam Coleman. Like, if I have to lose DeAndre Moore and Parker Livingston to get Cam Coleman, I'll take that trade, especially since I got Emmett Mosley and Ryan Wingo still coming back. I've got Dalen McCutcheon. I got Ryan Niblett. I got Khalil Lockett. I got some talented players coming in, including Cohen Brown, who you all know I'm a big fan of. So I think that's a win. So I really like what Texas did. I did. And, you know, offensive line needs upgraded. They went and got Melvin Siani from Wake Forest. I really like that pickup. You know, they got some depth players from the portal as well. Dylan Sikorsky from Oregon State has a shot to start, but then Lawrence Seymour gives depth. Jonte Newman gives depth. Defensive line-wise, I think they wanted a big body to replace Cole Brevard, and they went and got one in Ian Gefford. I mean, think about this. Cole Brevard left at 6'3", 346, and they got bigger at that position by getting Ian Gefford.
Significantly bigger.
That's nuts.
Ian Gefford's like 387 pounds.
Yeah.
Good Lord.
And Trev, I love the pickup of Rasheem Biles at linebacker. Love that pickup at linebacker. And in the secondary, they didn't add a whole lot, but I don't know that they needed a whole lot, to be honest with you. They got Bo Masco as kind of a nickel corner. They lost Tath. They lost Malik Muhammad, but I was happy that they were able to keep some of their DBs because like Kobe Black originally went to the portal. They convinced him to come back. Like they're like, look, we want you guys to be the next in line there. That's one of my question marks for Texas, but they didn't go to the portal. It's not like they lost out on a bunch of DBs that went other places. They strategically didn't target a lot of DBs, which tells me, agree or not, they like the young players they have in the secondary, and they want to build around them as replacements. So again, that's an evidence that you're just not looking to reload every year or rebuild every year. You were strategic with what they went after, and that's what you and I both like about Texas's class. I mean, you had a pretty talented receiving core last year that's now way better, in my opinion, by getting Cam Coleman. Like that was a big, big pickup. Plus to go with your incoming freshman class, which is pretty good. That's going to be dangerous.
Yeah, the Cam Coleman pickup reminds me a lot of the Malachi Fields pickup that Notre Dame had this past offseason. Like you had really good players coming back and Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison. You still needed to see some guys pan out, though. I think Ryan Williams is poised for another level of a breakout. Dalen McCutcheon I'm really high on, but Cam Coleman coming in takes that receiving core over the top. That is a nasty pickup, bro.
Yep.
I'm sure there's not many more people.
Emmett Mosley's now a full year in the system. You know, he's going to have a healthy offseason, dude. Yeah, that was a filthy, filthy pickup.
Yeah, not too many people are more happy than Arch Manning seeing Cam Coleman in the burn.
And they're deep. That's for sure. I mean, Dalen McCutcheon and Khalil Lockett were big time recruits that were true freshmen last year. Dude, they're. I mean, even losing Jamie French, and I mean, they're great, and their freshman class is going to be pretty good as well. Even though they did lose a big time receiver from Texas that they really wanted to Notre Dame, you know, legacy recruit, still got pretty good class coming in. So Texas was a winner for me as well, Trev.
Another winner for us was the Kentucky Wildcats. Brian just hired Will Stein. And no, this is not just because they picked up Kenny Minchie. Plays a factor because I do love that fit. Love that fit in Will Stein's offense. But what did we say at the time? We were excited about the hire, especially pairing him with Will Stein, but a lot of it was going to depend on the talent that they surrounded him with. And I think Kentucky did a really good job of really building a supporting cast around Kenny Minchie. They got Tegra Tishbola, the starting offensive lineman from Ohio State. Love that pickup, giving him some protection. In the trenches, they continued to build up. They got Ahmad Bro from LSU. They got Jamarian Harkless from Purdue on the defensive line. Love the running back pickup of getting C.J. Baxter. Kentucky very quietly had a very solid portal cycle in the SEC, but nobody's talking about him because it's Kentucky.
I'm still shocked they got Lance Hurd. I mean, nobody's talking about that either. Like, to get Lance Hurd, who was a starter at Tennessee, to go into the portal was really, really impressive. So, they got the kid from Ohio State. I think he went into the portal partly because he was not going to be starting anymore at Ohio State. But for Kentucky, that's a very good pickup. Big physical kid. You get Lance Hurd to replace there. And if you're going to go get a quarterback in the portal, you better build around him. And I think that's what they did. You got C.J. Baxter out of Texas that helps them. He'll be their top running back. Javonte Barnes gives them depth. They lost a lot of receiver. They really need Nick Anderson to be healthy. That's going to be a big, big key for them. But you got Shane Carr out of the portal, which I think is a really nice pickup. Your tight end room comes back in place. Your entire offensive line has to be rebuilt. And guess what? That's exactly what they're doing, and that's what they did in the portal. As they rebuilt that. How quickly that comes together is going to be kind of an interesting part of it. I like their D-line pickups. They had a very deep defensive line class, some G5 kids, some Power 4 kids that are good football players. They got Bo Barnes from Texas, who's kind of buried on that depth chart, to a linebacker room that's already pretty deep. And then they got some talent in the secondary. So Kentucky did not go out there and get like the big name portal pickups, but they got a lot of guys that improve their rooms and will give their quarterback, who has 2 years of eligibility, 2 years of eligibility, something to work with. And I think that was smart. C.J. Baxter has 2 years of eligibility left. Everybody but Nick Anderson at receiver has eligibility remaining. A lot of their offensive line pickups, Lance Hurd and Shabola are out after this year, but then they got several other guys that came in that have eligibility remaining. So D-line, they have multiple guys with eligibility remaining. So I did like the strategy that they employed at Kentucky, and I think they have a very underrated class in the SEC, not getting talked about enough.
No, very, very underrated class. But what you brought up yesterday, hopefully Jay Bateman and defensive coordinator kind of put together some of these defensive transfers. So we will see. We will see. The last class, transfer portal class that we're going to talk about in the SEC is Auburn. And I mentioned them yesterday as kind of a sleeper team for me, but I really like what Alex Golesh put together down at Auburn. Starting off, I love the Byron Brown pickup.
Yep.
You mentioned yesterday, Brian, that this is a very underrated backfield in the SEC, combined with what they have coming back, what they picked up in the transfer portal. So big fan of what they've done from front to back.
Dude, they already had good running backs. And they went out and got more. I mean, they're going to run the ball a lot next year. They had Jeremiah Cobb coming back and Omar Mabson coming back, who's a okay guy, but I like Jeremiah Cobb a lot. He had 969 yards, 5 touchdowns last year, and then they went out and added to it. You got the Nakai Davenport from South Florida. You got Bryson Washington from Baylor, Tay Meadows from Troy. All three of those guys rushed for at least 600 yards last year. Are they number ones at a place like Auburn? Probably not, maybe, but they don't need to be. Jeremiah Cobb's your one. This is your depth. Did you go out and get anybody as good as Cam Coleman and Eric Singleton and Malcolm Simmons and Perry Thompson and all? Maybe not, but you brought in 5 receivers from Auburn and Scrap Richardson they brought in from Notre Dame. I believe they're actually going to play him in the secondary, which he also played in high school, which I found to be very interesting. But you went out and got guys that know the system, that know Byron Brown, know they don't have the upside, but this is also a receiving core that went on the road last year and made the plays to beat Florida. So, I mean, it's not like this is a receiving core that, like, you didn't go get a bunch of guys from a D2 school and bring them with you. You went out and got your best receivers from South Florida to bring over and be impactful. I mean, Keshawn Singleton last year had 50 catches for 877 yards last season, and had 2 catches for 75 yards and a touchdown against Florida in a win over Florida. Had 5 for 93 and a touchdown against Boise State. So he's a really good football player, and he can help them. He brings size. So I love what Auburn did on offense. Brought in some. I say some guys with ability, but have a lot to prove at tight end. Jonathan Eccles is a former top recruit for South Florida. He's got a lot to prove. The offensive line is a bit of a question mark for me, but like what they did on the D line, like what they did at linebacker, with bringing in Michael Matthews Canty from Howard or Hampton, I forget. And then, of course, they had to rebuild the secondary quite a bit through the portal as well. And I think they did a good job with that. 2 kids from South Florida, Andre Jordan Jr., they brought in to give depth. Fred Gaskin that they brought in from South Florida. Gavin Jenkins, it's a depth player from South Florida. So I think Auburn had a very underrated class. The knock on them is they had to replace a bunch. But again, this is a first-year coach that was, of course, going to lose those players. How did he do to recover? And I think he did a great job. Talking about the SEC as a whole is challenging, Trevor, to pick 4 classes because there's a lot of classes we aren't going to talk about. Texas A&M filled some important needs to the portal. Ole Miss brought in a lot of portal guys. I mean, really, honestly, who from the SEC didn't build around the portal this year outside of Georgia? You know what I mean? They didn't bring in a whole lot. But Alabama had to go out and get a bunch of guys in the portal. I didn't love their portal class. The reality is that the SEC is getting, and to me, unnecessarily high marks for these highly ranked portal classes when in reality, I don't think that they necessarily deserve that because I think the reality is they're losing as many good players as they're getting. In some instances, they're losing more good players than they're bringing in. Another team that I will just give honorable mention to that I thought had a sneaky good portal offseason is Oklahoma. But Oklahoma's in the same boat Georgia is. They don't have to go get a lot of guys in the portal because they're bringing a lot of guys back. And, they didn't lose a whole lot. They didn't sign a real big portal class, but they needed help at receiver. So they went out and got Trell Harris, which you and I have talked about. We thought was a great pickup. You got Parker Livingston, but they're not remaking their roster, which is partly why they're one of my top. The 3 teams that I think needed to do the least amount in the portal also happen to be the 3 teams I have ranked highest for the SEC going into next season. And so that's why I think you brought in a lot of guys, but you're losing a lot of guys. Like A&M had a very hit or miss class for me. Andrew Gilmore talked about they had a good D-line class. You and I talked about that yesterday, with the kid from Northwestern they got, and then CJ Mims from East Carolina. Their offensive line class is going to be hit or miss. It's going to be boom or bust because you had guys that have some talent, but guys that weren't that great at the schools they came from. And it was all SEC kids. So what you're doing is you're losing all these kids and then you're replacing with the portal. And it's like, I don't know how sustainable that is for some of these teams, and so you could literally have a whole top 10 and just have SEC classes because of how many kids that they're all bringing in. But it's kind of gross just watching these SEC kids just go from SEC school to SEC school. It's ridiculous. It really is. But it also makes it a little bit maybe more challenging to evaluate just how good some of these teams are because, you signed 35 guys, but you lost 41. And that's why I think makes it a little bit difficult to evaluate just as a whole the SEC.
Yeah, a lot of it is just feasting on names. The hardest part about evaluating individual players is, at least when you go from like a G5 school to a P4 school, you can voice concerns about, hey, it worked for you at Florida International. Is it going to work for you the same at Oklahoma? Maybe. I don't know. That's a big jump. But what kind of makes it tough with the SEC is like, okay, well, it didn't work for you at Florida. Why is it all of a sudden going to work for you at Texas? Mm-hmm. Or it didn't work for you at Texas. Why is it now going to work for you at Auburn? So that's what makes those classes hard to evaluate too. And that's why the ranking system and bigger outlets, they kind of fudge it a little bit because they go off of the initial high school recruiting rankings. Yeah. And then that's where it gets all messy.
That's a team that I do think deserves some mention as having a good portal class is Florida. There's some risk in their class. Like how good is Aaron Philo going to be? I still like that pickup. There's some risk bringing in Evan Pryor, a former Ohio State kid from Cincinnati who's just had trouble staying healthy, but they don't need him to be the guy. That's Jaden Baugh. I like the Bailey Stockton and Eric Singleton pickups. I like those a lot. Like Micah Mays from Wake Forest is a good football player. You got Luke Herring from Georgia Tech, another kid that you coached, the offensive coordinator coach. So they did some good things in the portal, Trev. I think they're another class that we could talk about as maybe being an honorable mention, good quality class that could help them rebuild. And that's honestly why I considered putting Florida as my top 25 team. If you'll remember, the original list that I sent you yesterday had Florida in the top 25. because I do think they had a really good portal class. I think you could put them right in that group with Kentucky and Auburn, and I think they added more impact players even arguably than Kentucky. But I think the guys for Kentucky are more bigger upgrades over what they had than maybe what the impact players at Florida are replacing guys who were already pretty good, just they weren't coached well. The guys at Kentucky are replacing guys who weren't very good or are gone. And that's why I went with Kentucky over Florida. But if you're just going to rank the top 10 players for Kentucky and the top 10 players for Florida, I think top 10 players for Florida are better. And so that's why this wasn't a pure ranking. This was about how it impacts your roster. I think Florida's a team that could be good, could end up it, but for them, it all is going to depend on Aaron Philo. Like how does he end up being? He's shown flashes. There's a lot of people at Georgia Tech that they were not happy to see him leave. He was buried behind Haynes King, who was very good. But there's a lot of people that like Aaron Philo. I mean, and remember when Haynes King was banged up last year, him and Aaron Philo were kind of rotating. And Aaron Philo played a lot in the upset over Miami last year. And he also passed for 265 in the win over NC State when Haynes King was out, ran for 57 yards and had a touchdown as well. So he was they're going to be their future at quarterback. And that's why they had to go get, other guys to replace him out of the portal. But they like him a lot, but he's inexperienced. And we don't really know how he'll be as a full-time starter in the SEC, but there's some talent there. How good he is going to determine just how good this class is going to be for Florida.
Agreed. He started against Notre Dame in 2024 as well because Haynes King was banged up.
No, they went with the other kid. There's a lot of Georgia Tech people that said they should have gone with Philo. The kid that I'm trying to remember the kid's name that played for them. They should have gone with Aaron Philo against Notre Dame, but they went with give me a second. It was Zach Pyron. The P, also the P, and I didn't understand that move. That was a
interesting
head scratcher. Yeah, Philo and Pyron, I get it, similar names, but yeah, he didn't start that game. That was Pyron.
Well, scratch that from the record. It wasn't, but he has played meaningful minutes for Georgia Tech before in the past.
Should have played against Notre Dame.
Well, let's switch over to the ACC then, Brian. And one of the first teams that we're going to talk about here are the Miami Hurricanes. And they're a team that we both have ranked in our preseason top 10. As of right now on FanDuel, they have the 7th best odds to win the national championship this year. And we believe that their portal class is going to play a factor in them making another run potentially to the ship. It's going to be very interesting to see what they do this year.
Well, Miami was in a bit, they weren't quite like Notre Dame in regards to the lower numbers. They're pretty close. I mean, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10. They only brought in 12 kids. Now, I know there's a couple other guys that they're looking to get, and one knock on them is they did want to tackle and missed out. That was the one big kind of black eye, but Miami was not in a position because they've done a lot of good high school recruiting. That's what I like about what Cristobal's done is, yes, he's gone out and lived in the portal the last couple of years, but while doing so, has also gone out and brought in good high school recruiting classes and has gotten to the point where it was clear that Miami didn't want to continue living in the portal, that it was basically kind of how Notre Dame is doing it. It was meant to be get us by until we get there. And their last their 26 class ranked in the top 10, according to 247 Sports. They were 14th the year before that. And then their 24 class was 4th. In the country. And, that class is getting ready to have a big impact on their depth chart. It's Justin Scott, Marquise Lightfoot, Armando Blunt, Elijah Lofton. There's a lot of players from that class that they're going to be counting on this season. OJ Frederick is a part of that class. So there's a lot of guys from that class that they're counting on being impactful players. And it's that high school recruiting is why they haven't needed the numbers. So they were in a position where we don't need 30 guys. We need 10 to 13, 14, but we need impact players. So they went out and got Darian Mensah, who's an impact player. They went out and got Cooper Barcotti. Now, they lost some guys from the portal. They needed to go out there and continue to reload their receiving core, and has, in my opinion, one of the 3 or 4 best receiving classes out there, if not the best. It's arguably the best. Getting Cooper Barcotti last minute from Duke. He was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. Getting Cam Vaughn from West Virginia, good, solid player last year. Getting Vandrevius Jacobs from South Carolina, he was a 548-yard guy on only 32 catches last year. And then you're bringing in some good high school players. But look, you lost Keelan Marion and C.J. Daniels to the NFL. They're graduates, right? JoJo Trader left. Ray Joseph left. Nye Carr left. So you've got Malachi Toney. I believe Josh Moore's coming back. And that's really, of your top guys, all you really had coming back. I would argue that just from a talent standpoint, Miami's going to be better at receiver next year than they were this year.
Agreed.
I would argue that Cooper Barcotti, Cam Vaughn, and Vandrevius Jacobs are better than Keelan Marion, C.J. Daniels, and JoJo Trader. I would argue that like strongly. Like I would actually debate that with you. So I think they upgraded there, Trev. I think they got better there. The only thing that they're really lacking that they needed, what was another position they had a need? They needed defensive linemen. Impact, guys that can come in and play now. They lose Ruben Bain, you lose Akeem Messidor, you lose David Blay at D-tackle. Yeah, you've got Moten coming back, you got Scott coming back, Blunt, Lightfoot, but your depth is a question mark. So what did they go do? They went out and got Damon Wilson, one of the most impact pass rushers in the country. They went out and got Jaquez Carter, who's not only a talented young player that can be in your rotation, but he's a redshirt freshman that'll have 3 years of eligibility or 4 years of eligibility left. No, did he? I think he actually played beyond his eligibility this past year for Ohio State. I have to go look at that. He's at least no more than a sophomore. He's either a redshirt freshman or a true sophomore. So now he's a guy you don't have to go out and get him. And then getting Keona Davis, who's kind of a hybrid. He can play some end. He can play some three technique from Nebraska, was also a great pickup. And so I really like what they did, Trev. I think they brought in a very good class. They didn't have a lot of needs. You bring in Omar Thornton, who's kind of a hybrid safety / rover linebacker type of guy to bring in. You didn't have a lot of needs in the secondary, so you have a very good freshman class coming in. So you went out and got Conrad Hussey to give you some depth there, at the nickel spot because you lost Keontae Scott. So they were replacing guys that were gone and not really having a lot of needs. And so they were able to get a guy here, a guy there. The only position that I think they fell short in the portal was offensive line. It's obvious they wanted to tackle. They made a very hard run at Jordan Seaton. There were other guys that they missed out on. They brought in Jamal Merriweather from Georgia. He hasn't played a whole lot. That's a risky move. So that's the only area they missed on. Outside of that, I think they had a very good portal class for Miami. Very impactful. Very impactful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it checks a lot of the boxes that we've been looking at. Does it fill the need? Do you bring in impact talent? Do you bring in players for depth and players that can play right away? I like what Miami did in the portal. Very similar to how we also like what Louisville did in the portal. They're the other ACC team that we wanted to talk about as well. We have 4 total, but Louisville is kind of next up on that list. And they were a team that I talked about yesterday. Again, 2 teams that Brian and I both had ranked in our way too early top 25s. But and it's not just for the pickup of, Lincoln Kindhold's in the portal. One thing that we talked about before the show, Brian, was sometimes success in the portal is also getting players to withdraw their name from the portal as well.
Oh, yeah. There was no bigger pickup for Louisville than keeping Isaac Brown, bro.
100%. 100%. He was ranked in our preseason top 5 running backs going into 2025. I have a strong feeling he's going to be back there for me again in 2026, going into 2026. But talk about portal wins. One of them is keeping one of the best running backs, if not the best running back in the ACC, on your roster.
That was huge. Now, hopefully they'll use him correctly this year. That would be nice. I do not think they did a good job of using their talented backfield last year. Louisville's an interesting team, Trevor. I would really like it if Louisville would stop relying on the portal as much as they are. That's my one, and everybody knows I'm a big Jeff Brom guy, but I think he relies too heavily on the portal. Well, they can't get top recruits. That's fine. Go do what Louisville used to do. Go find those underrated 3-star kids with upside from Florida and Georgia and Louisiana and Kentucky and Tennessee and Ohio. And then each year have some targets where eventually you're getting smaller and smaller portal classes, and that's not really what they're doing. They're completely rebuilding their roster every year in the portal, and I just don't know how sustainable that is. Having said that, they did a pretty good job of that this offseason. You needed a new quarterback. You have a kid that's got far less experience than the kid you lost, but I'd trust him more than Miller Moss, honestly. There's some questions there about depth. Yeah, you didn't really need a running back in the portal. You have Isaac Brown and Kewan Brown coming back, but they still went out and got Marquise Davis from Missouri, who gives them a big, kind of a more physical presence at running back. You had to completely revamp your receiving corps. Chris Bell gone, Colin Lacey gone, Takari Collins gone, Antonio Meeks gone. But there's another guy that they convinced to come back too. Getting Trayshawn Hurry to come out of the portal also was a big win for Louisville, because he gives them a guy with experience that knows the system, that has a little bit of a bigger body. That was also a portal win. I would argue they're going to be just as good at receiver this year as they were last year, if not as good, just a touch below. Love the Trey Richardson pickup from Vanderbilt. Just go ask Iowa how hard he is to cover. You know what I mean, Trev? Like, if you didn't know how good he was, like, look, man, I know that they're playing a pretty good Iowa team. This is what this kid did in the last 4 games of the year. 3 catches for 124 yards against Auburn, 6 for 159 and 3 touchdowns against Kentucky, 6 for 75 and a tutty against Tennessee. And then against one of the best defenses in the country, against Iowa, went out and had 6 catches for 127 yards and a touchdown. And that was not with a lot of guys from Iowa sitting out. He's a dude. And I like the slot kid they got out of, from Florida State. Luane McCoy is a good player. Jackson Voss, a really nice pickup. It's a very underrated pickup. Gives them a bigger bodied kid. Transfer. There was a kid that was supposed to visit Notre Dame at tight end, Brody Foley from Tulsa, used to be at Indiana. I didn't want Notre Dame to get him, and it's not because he's not a good player, Trevor. It's just I didn't think they had a need at tight end. Notre Dame canceled that visit. He goes to Louisville. It's a good pickup for Louisville, who likes to throw to their tight end. Defensively, I think they had a good portal class. They got the Smith brothers to transfer in, Jacob and Jared Smith. Notre Dame fans remember them. Notre Dame recruited them. You got Tommy Zeismer to come in from Eastern Kentucky. Tyler Thompson was a really good pickup, in my opinion, from North Carolina. They needed that because they've only got really 2 regulars coming back. Clev Lubin and A.J. Green are like the only D linemen coming back. They are pretty good at linebacker coming back. You've got Antonio Watts comes back, T.J. Capers come back, Stanquan Clark comes back, and you've got a solid high school class coming in, which I like. But then you look at their secondary, same story. Everybody but Tayon Holloway, I believe, is gone. So you had to completely rebuild through the secondary, and they did well. Now, what I like that they did here, Trev, and where I'll give them a lot of credit, where I like what Louisville did this year, is here's the eligibility remaining for a lot of their top portal players. Quarterback, 2 years. Running back, 4 years, 3 years. Wide receiver, 2, 2, 3. Tight end, Brody Foley's out of eligibility. Defensive line, all but 1 player has at least 2 years of eligibility remaining. No portal linebackers. And then the secondary, 4 of their 6 secondary players have eligibility remaining. And one of the guys that doesn't is Ben Perry, who never should have left Louisville in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, sometimes grass isn't always greener. And so I do like that. They brought, and then another 1-year player is the Cone Intringer kid from Iowa, who's an impact player, in my opinion. Getting him in, it's only for 1 year, but he's an impact player. So I do like that. Here's the big question mark that I have. I don't love their portal class on the offensive line. It's a boomer bust deal. Look, you got the Daugherty kid from Boston College, who was a nice player for them, but their line was a mess. You got Johnny Brown, who I think came in from Georgia Southern. Evan Wibberly they got from Kentucky. He had transferred into Kentucky. He didn't even start for Kentucky last year, and you're hoping that he can come in and start for you on the offensive line. A team that you beat 41-0, you're hoping you can get one of their backup offensive linemen to come play for you and start for you. That's a big red concern for me. That ultimately is going to determine how good Louisville's going to be this year. So they did very well in the portal. I just wish Louisville would stop having to constantly live in the portal the way that they are. You're Jeff Brom, dude. Go find a high school quarterback. You know what I mean? Like, it is a little frustrating. I am curious how Louisville fans feel about that, but I don't think Louisville has to. Louisville's a program that's always going to need to go to the portal more than a Notre Dame, more than a Miami and a Georgia. They just are, because they're going to get rated more than other people. It's just the reality of the situation, but I don't think they need to major in it to the degree that they are. You know what I'm saying? I love that Anthony Easton, who's a Louisville fan, just said it. We ain't rich, but we ain't poor either. And that's my whole point. you're going to always have to live in the portal more than Georgia, Ohio State, Notre Dame. But you don't have to act like you're, a G5 team either, where you're losing your whole roster every year. Like, there's no need for that. I think they need to find that balance. And he's too good of a coach not to, especially at quarterback. There's no reason that Jeff Brom in year 3 at Louisville should be having to go to the portal again for a quarterback who's never started a game.
Agreed completely. I mean, because of the amount of eligibility left in Louisville's transfer portal class this season, if managed and developed well, this could be that bridging the gap class that makes them more balanced.
Hope so.
Knowing that they have transfer portal players that have multiple years of eligibility. Ideally, in the 27 class, you focus more on high school recruiting, but it's one of those believe it when you see it type things. I'm with you.
Yep.
I'm with you completely.
Yeah. And again, they're not in a state that's devoid of talent either. So like their overall rank, their overall high school class was 31st this year. That's not bad. That's not bad. So you just gotta keep those guys. That's going to be the big thing for Louisville. I think that's what it ranked. Hold on a second. Let me find this Louisville class. No, it's 46th. This is the 26th class. 46th. They brought in 21 commits. So I wonder if that ranking also included the portal class. The 31st was also the portal class. But like they're this is 247. So again, take it with a grain of salt. But they're a 2025 portal class or high school class ranked 71st. Only had 16 commits. That's inexcusable for Louisville. Having said all that, this is a really good portal class. If you're going to live and die by the portal, you better bring in a good portal class, and this is a really good portal class, in my opinion. And it's a portal class with a lot of 2 and 3 years of eligibility players left. That's the other thing. I want to see teams like Louisville bringing in more of those 3 and 4 years of eligibility guys that maybe they missed out on at the high school level. I would major in that more so than I would going out and getting a bunch of guys with only 1 or 2 years left. That would make a lot of sense to me.
Next team that we're getting ready to talk about here, Brian, is a team that had to rebuild completely through the transfer portal because of a coaching change. We're talking about the Virginia Tech Hokies, who brought in James Franklin. The Virginia Tech Nittany Lions.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes, them. I'm familiar with them. Yeah, I didn't know who the Hokies were. I didn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I know. Jeez, I'm full of mistakes today. I got to lock in.
Oh, good, man. I'm rubbing off. It's not good. How many times do I need to say Francisco Mendoza before it starts to, wear off on you? I get it.
But Virginia Tech did bring in a big portal class, a lot of it out of necessity. And we're talking about them in a very similar light, to kind of how we talked about with Kentucky needing to bring in just a high volume, how we talked about LSU had to bring in a high volume of players because of how much roster turnover. But even within those big portal classes, you can still fill needs. You can still bring in top-level talent. And I like what Virginia Tech did in the portal.
It was out of need for guys they'd lost, and also out of need because their roster wasn't great. It wasn't bad. It was better than what their record showed, but it wasn't a great roster either. And I think James Franklin absolutely nailed this portal class. It's one of the better portal classes in the country, in my opinion. Yes, you went out and got Ethan Grunkmeyer out of the portal, who will probably be your starting quarterback this year. But they also went out and got Bryce Baker, who was a 4-star recruit coming to high school, who's going to bat. I mean, Grunkmeyer's going to have to win the job. You know what I mean? Like, Bryce Baker's not going to, go down without a fight. You've got at running back, you've got Marcellus Hawkins coming back. Jerry Overton comes back. You went out and got Bill Davis from Louisiana, the Raging Cajuns. And then you're bringing in Messiah Mickens in the high school ranks. Again, I like that pickup. You look at wide receiver. You have some, you lose Donovan Green. And I'm still so bummed that he had that knee injury because he just was never the same player after that. I think would have been an NFL player. You lose Cam Seldon, who's a nice player. Isaiah Spencer's a nice player. But you've got Aiden Green coming back, I believe. But you needed help there. So they go out and get Quayshawn Brown from Duke. Everybody's talking about Cooper Barcotti, who was their best receiver. But Quayshawn Brown, was a really good player for Duke this year. Had 65 catches, 844 yards, and 5 touchdowns. You get Tyseer Denmark to follow you, who is a talented freshman. You get Marlon Jackson from Louisiana Tech, who gives you nice depth. So you've upgraded your receiving core. You got Benji Gosnell coming back. You've got tight end. You've got Jarikus Hairston coming back. But then you go out and get Luke Reynolds, who is really talented from Penn State. So, you just go down the board, Trev, just the guys they were able to get. Defensive line. You get Malachi Williams, a guy that Notre Dame fans should be familiar with. Cortez Harris and Randy Andarica from Penn State. You also went out and got Kamorian Morgan from Baylor, Javian Hilson from Missouri. Not a lot of guys that have played a ton of football, but a lot of talented kids with 3, 3, 4, 3, 4, 4 years of eligibility remaining. That's the proper way to rebuild a team. And so sometimes you can be like, well, man, you're going to the portal a lot, Franklin. Like, were you trying to like rebuild this thing in a hurry? No. The 2 quarterbacks they got, 3 and 4 years of eligibility left. The receivers they got, the kid that they got from Louisiana Tech, the only one out of eligibility. Keyshawn Brown's got 2 years left. Tyseer Denmark's got 3. You look at tight end, Luke Reynolds has got 3 years of eligibility left. You look at their defensive line, 3, 3, 4, 3, 4, 4 of eligibility. You look at their linebackers, Keon Wiley, which is a very good pickup from Penn State. He's only got 1 year left. But Curtis Jones Jr. from West Virginia, nice depth player. He's got 3 years left. Same thing in the secondary. Jaquez White, who they got from Troy, has 2 years left. Kenny Wosley, who they got from Penn State, has 3 years left. Cam Chadwick, who they got from UConn, has 2 years left. So the needs to go out there and rebuild again next year shouldn't be as great because you also went out and recruited a bunch of good high school players. So I think this is the perfect recipe for James Franklin. They got talent, they got depth, and they got a lot of guys that have multiple years of eligibility left. And because you got so many kids from Penn State, you've got kids that can help the current roster understand what the expectations are. And they didn't have a lot of needs on the offensive line from a number standpoint, but they needed to improve the talent and depth there. They went out and did that too. So I love what James Franklin has done this offseason because we need to major in the portal now, but we're going to do it with younger players with multiple years of eligibility, and we're still going to go out there and crush it on the recruiting trail in high school as best we can. Getting Messiah Mickens to come instead of Penn State or Notre Dame, schools that wanted him, huge pickup. They got Troy Hune, the kid that was committed to him at Penn State, now committed to them at Virginia Tech. So, yeah, Grunkmeyer and Baker are going to battle now, but your quarterback of the future, you hope, you also got in high school ranks. They got a 27 quarterback committed already, I believe. So I think James Franklin understands the balance needed to be good in portal and in high school. And Virginia Tech is always going to need to be a school that lives off of high school recruiting, but also has a nice size portal class every year to upgrade talent. And I think Franklin shows an early understanding of that. And that's why this is one of my favorite classes. And it's partly why you have them as a preseason top 25 team, Trev.
Yeah, it is. This is a very foundational class being built by James Franklin, because ideally you see the groundwork that he is laying to then move away eventually from being a portal heavy team. Love what they did. But it's not so much that they're bringing in a bunch of like backups and rotational guys from Penn State and they're just hoping that they can be, playoff caliber roster. I don't think that's the expectation for James Franklin in year one. And I think that my ranking of them in the way too early top 25 was reflective of that. I put them at, I think, 23rd, 24th. That's not a playoff team. But what this does is it builds a foundation for the future. And that's something that I really, really love about this portal class. Now, I think James Franklin has done an exceptional job up to this point. Now you just got to hope that it reflects the on-field results. That's for sure. Brian, yep.
Agree completely.
The final team that we're going to talk about here in the ACC are the SMU Mustangs, a team that Notre Dame is actually playing later on in the regular season in 2026. But this was another school that you really liked what they did in the transfer portal.
Well, I like how you said you like what they did in the transfer portal. So in case it's bad, you don't have to take any. I said in the show that you liked them, man, not me. No, I do like this SMU portal class. Again, SMU doesn't lose a ton. Like there's a couple positions they lose some key players, but they're in a position now where they don't have to rebuild every year through the portal. I think they're doing a nice job of that. I think when you look at what they did, a quarterback, they didn't really have a portal need. At running back, they did. And, you lose TJ Harden to graduation. Chris Johnson jumps in the portal, goes to SMU. And so you're sitting there like, okay, well, what the heck are they going to do? Well, they went out and got Kendrick Raphael, who had, I think, let me look it up. I think some like 14, 15 touchdowns at Cal last year. Give me a second. I'm going to look up his numbers at Cal last year. Yeah, he had 13 touchdowns at Cal last year. He's 4.1 per carry. He's a hammer back. But he's a guy that you look at. He went and rushed for 111 yards against SMU last year on 33 carries and a touchdown in their upset win over SMU. So you get him and kind of add that hammer type of player at running back. Out of the portal, they went and got Yannick Smith from East Carolina, who had 583 yards receiving last year. He's a good football player to go with Jalen Cooper, Ymir Knight. You got Jalen Hale from Alabama, who's a talented kid, on top of a really good incoming freshman class of wide receivers. Tight end, you've got R.J. Maryland coming back, but they went out and got Randy Pittman from Ohio State, and they got the Theo Milan Orstrom kid from Texas A&M, who obviously is a kid with some talent there for the Aggies. So he had 19 catches for 186 yards last year, for them. And he was kind of buried a little bit on a pretty deep depth chart, but he's a good football player as well. So they restocked there. The offensive line, I think they could have used an offensive lineman, but they've got 3 starters coming back this year. So I think they should be okay there. I would have liked to have seen one guy get picked up. Defensive line is a place where they needed a little bit more help. They lost some players. They went out and got Ira Singleton from South Florida, who's a good football player. They went and got Christian Davis from Louisiana Tech, a good football player. Secondary-wise, they didn't have a lot of needs. They needed guys that could come in and help you out right now. So they go out and get Jarvis Lee from South Florida, really good football player at safety or at cornerback. And then they lost their nickel from last year. So they went out and got Javon Thomas from Texas A&M, who started some games for them. So it was a very targeted class. It didn't need to be a big class. They brought in starters. They filled big needs. And I think overall, they needed a strong class to solidify them as once again, a top 25 football team. And I think they were able to do that. It's one of my favorite classes. You could argue that maybe there's some classes that are obviously going to rank higher because they brought in more players. But as far as like the impact, talent, finding needs, I think they did a very good job. And they got a couple very underrated pickups in this class.
I think so too. I really like what they did at wide receiver. I think they went out and they got players that fit the system of what they want to do. I think pass game wise, I think their offense on top of Kevin Jennings taking another step is going to look a little bit more like what it did in 2024 than what it did in 2025. A lot of different ingredients going into that mix there, but I think what they did in the portal receiver is definitely going to help them. I'm with you. I do like what SMU did in the portal. I'm impressed with what they've done.
Yeah,
that's for sure.
I mean, and there were some other decent classes, Trev, we were talking about, NC State, I know was a class that you liked. I think Florida State had a solid portal class. There were some other teams that did well. I think North Carolina had a solid portal class this year. Stanford even went out and got some portal players, Trev. I mean, they were even able to have some success in the portal, but Clemson didn't need a big portal class. They just needed to hit some targeted players, and they did that. Getting Elliott Washington to come in and play nickel. They got, I forget the name of the running back. I just said his name, the kid from SMU, Chris Johnson. They got from SMU at running back. They needed another veteran running back. They got that. I think Florida State had a really nice underrated portal class. I really do. I think they filled some depth needs. I don't think Florida State necessarily needed a lot of step in right now and start guys. I do think they upgraded. They got a good running back. Trey Wisner is a good running back. Ashton Daniels is perfect for Gus Malzahn's system. So I thought they had a nice portal class. I just don't think it's as good as some of the others. Georgia Tech didn't have a great class, but I'll tell you what, they might have had the best actual player in the portal. If Justice Haynes is healthy, that's going to be a great pickup for them, in my opinion. But so there were some good classes in the ACC, not a lot of great classes in the ACC, in my opinion. I think the classes in the ACC that won out were the ones that were able to do more targeted additions than it was necessarily the teams that rebuilt. But yeah, Stanford even had 6 portal pickups, including Davis Warren from Michigan.
Bang.
Yeah. And of course, in typical fashion, 2 of their pickups were Ivy League kids. They got a kid from Yale. It's a good football player, actually, and a kid from Harvard. So I just thought that was pretty funny. It's that's so Stanford. We're going to let you go get portal guys. All right, cool. Where are you getting your portal guys from? We're going to go to Stanford. We're going to go to Yale, and we're going to get those guys. Yeah. So, but the kid they got, the Nico Brown kid they got from Yale, Trev's a pretty good football player. He's a good receiver. But heck, when Stanford's getting 6 portal guys, I mean, Stanford only had 2 fewer guys than Notre Dame did. So
that's crazy to think. That's crazy to think about.
Yeah.
Okay.
But
There we
I would
go.
say I think the ACC and the Big 12 were at the bottom of which conferences helped themselves the most in the portal. I think the ACC probably got rated a little bit more than they helped themselves.
Agreed. Well, let's talk a little bit then about the Big 12, Brian, and start talking about the Texas Tech Red Raiders. And they're a program that has obviously found a lot of success through the transfer portal, especially in 2025, made it to the playoffs, won the Big 12. But I love a lot of their pickups, even outside of the quarterback pickup, but Brendan Sorsby. Love that pickup from Cincinnati, but I love some of the pieces they surrounded him with. I've been very high on Kenny Johnson the last 2 seasons. Love the fit in that offense. I think he replaces Reggie Virgil very well within that offensive scheme. Defensively, like we talked about yesterday, he's not Jacob Rodriguez, but I like Austin Romaine, the kid they got from Kansas State. Very productive player. He was the leader of that defense. And then to go along with Roberts, their linebacking core, I don't think will overall take as big of a step back as what some may think due to losing Jacob Rodriguez. It's still taking a ding, but they went out and I believe they added the Mateen kid. Not going to even try to pronounce his last name, from Wake Forest.
Good football player.
He is. Yeah. He is. So I like what Texas Tech did. I think that they are. I know we're not ranking them 1 through 4, but I think Texas Tech probably had the best portal cycle in the Big 12 as well. That's how I look at them. But another successful cycle for Joey McGuire and the Red Raiders.
I think it was between them and Arizona State for me. And I would give Texas Tech the advantage, in my opinion. And I like their quarterback more. Sorsby's obviously the big gem. They're loaded at running back. They didn't have a need there. Losing Caleb Douglas and Reggie Virgil those are tough losses. They're both out of eligibility. Reggie Virgil's having a nice week at the Senior Bowl this week. Caleb Douglas was their leading receiver. We remember Reggie Virgil prepping for Miami of Ohio 2 years ago, Trev, talking about, like, this kid's legit. This is a big, tall kid that's legit. What do? They not only get Kenny Johnson, who you like, who's a good football player, had 695 yards receiving last year. They also went and got Malcolm Simmons from Auburn, who's another young, talented player, 457 yards last year on 25 catches on a terrible offense. They got Dante Lee from Liberty, who had almost 600 yards receiving last year. So they went out and got some good football players there. Offensive line wise, they have I think 3 starters coming back, plus Felix Ojo coming in, who's a 5-star high school recruit. But you needed your interior is a question mark. So what do? You go out and get Jordan Church from Louisville, who also has 2 years of eligibility left. So defensive line is going to be the interesting one, Trevor, because that's the position where I don't know that what you added is as good as what you lost. The question is it good enough? Because I think the offense will be better this year. The defense isn't as good as it was last year. Will it be good enough to still be good? Losing David Bailey, Romello Height's killing it at the Senior Bowl this year. And you replace him with Adam Trick, who's a good football player, as an edge rusher from Miami of Ohio. Is he the David Bailey caliber, Romello Height caliber? We're going to find out, right? I don't think that he is, but we're going to find out. You went out and got some good, some bigger guys. Trey White from San Diego State's a good football player. He had 8 sacks last year in that league. Bryce Butler's a good rotation player from Washington. You got the Mateen Ibarik Agba from Wake Forest, who's a good football player. Jamon Mathis from Kent State's a good football player. So, they went out and got a lot of good players to where it's not like if Mateen is the guy, you're good. If not, you're in trouble. They went out and got multiple players at those positions. And like you said, I love the Austin Romaine pickup. Love it. Secondary, they didn't do as much. They lost Cole Wisniewski. Outside of that, they had a lot coming back, so they didn't go there. They brought in one portal player from there. But then also what you're seeing is them also trying to go the high school route. You got Donovan Webb. They got a couple 4-star DBs last year. They went out and they're also buying top high school players. Felix Oji was a 5-star offensive tackle. So I do think Texas Tech understands, we'd like to start using some of these financial resources to go get top high school players as well. They got a commitment from one of the best 2027 players in the country so far this year. So they're always going to need to recruit more out of the portal than other people. But I do like the fact that they're trying to make more of an impact at the high school ranks. But until then, keep doing what you're doing in the portal. This is going to make you a factor. And they're a little bit more 1 and 2 years of eligibility left than maybe some others. Kenny Johnson's 1 year, Dante Lee's 1 year, Brendan Sorsby's got 1 year left. Only 2 of your 7 or 6 portal pickups have multiple years left. Linebacker Romaine's got a year, Adam Trick's got a year, Corey Platt's got a year. So we're going to be back here again next year talking about Texas Tech being a major player in the transfer portal.
Agreed. We share the same concerns about their defensive line. I think, and this is just me reading in between the lines a little bit about what they're bringing in the portal, but I think their approach is very similar to what Marcus Freeman said about Notre Dame's defensive line going into 2025. Is there an individual Riley Mills on the roster currently? No. Is there an individual Howard Cross, especially Howard Cross from like a 2023 on the roster? No. But what they're going to be able to do is come at you in waves because you have to replace the production, not the individual player. I could see Texas Tech trying to do that with their rotation.
Yeah.
I like that attack approach.
Well, exactly. And that's what they went out and did. They brought a lot of good players in hopes that they could, somebody's going to hit. But they lost some dudes, though, man.
Yeah.
They lost some dudes. But they got good proven foot. This is what the different strategy that Texas Tech took. They didn't go get the former 5-star recruit who's not done a thing in high school but gets a lot of hype because of what he was in high school. They went out and got guys that are proven college football players. That's a lot of what Cignetti did. He got a couple guys that hadn't proved a whole lot, but for the most part, what Cignetti brought with him from JMU and went out and got in the portal are proven, productive college football players. That's what Texas Tech did last year. They didn't go out and get a bunch of guys that were like, well, we think this guy can be good, or he was a former 5-star, but he didn't play. They went out and got a David Bailey, who was a proven college football player. They went out and got Romello Height, who's a proven college football player. They went out and got guys. I mean, even the running back, Quentin Joyner, who's going to be back next year, just nuts when you think about that running back room with Dickey and Williams, and you're going to have now Quentin Joyner, who I think is better than both of those guys.
Yeah.
They're going to be running the ball, and they got a quarterback that can run now. Like, Texas Tech's going to run the ball a lot next year. But you've also got, I kind of understand why they're going the way they're going. They want proven players. And a lot of those guys are older as they also then try to recruit more out of high school. So I get it. They're trying to win one. Like that. Who's that? Was it Cody Coleman? Is that the guy's name? What's that guy's big donor that they have?
Oh, I don't know.
He's trying to win a title. He's not trying to, build a program per se. He wants to win a title.
Sure.
And that's what they're trying to do.
No, absolutely. Now, the other team we're going to talk about here in the Big 12, Brian, is the team that you had actually already mentioned, and that's the Arizona State Sun Devils. You talked about them yesterday in your way too early ranking, but I know you also love, and I also love what they did in the transfer portal this year.
Yeah, Trev. I mean, a lot of this is going to depend on how good is Cutter Boley. That's going to be a big part of this. How good he plays is going to have a big say in what they do. He was a redshirt freshman last year, but technically that should have been his freshman year. Cutter Boley was a kid that reclassified into the class of 2024. Notre Dame was actually looking at him a little bit, ended up going a different direction, but they were looking at him. I think that's the year they ended up with. That was the CJ Carr year, but very early in the process, he was on their radar. CJ was always the top guy, but Cutter was on the. He was actually the 25 class, the Deuce Knight class. And then he reclassified to 24. So he was originally in the Deuce Knight class. And then reclassified and, didn't play a lot played the 4 games, threw 2 touchdowns, 4 picks, didn't do a whole lot. Comes out last year. He's not the starter, gets kind of thrust into the starting lineup because of some injuries and has some good moments. Against Georgia, he throws for 225 and 2 touchdowns on 41 attempts, throws for 330 yards again and 5 touchdowns against Tennessee, struggles against Auburn, was okay against Florida, but they didn't need him to do a whole lot against Florida. They wiped the map with Florida. I thought he did some very good things against Vanderbilt in a loss and then struggled mightily against Louisville. But keep in mind, that was technically what should have been his freshman year of college last year, should have been, because he was a reclassified kid in 2024. So how well he does is going to go a long way towards determining. Now, the good thing for Cutter Boley is he's going to coach under a guy that flat out has proven he knows how to develop quarterbacks. Kenny Dillingham is emerging as one of the better quarterback whisperers in college football. But if you're going to get a kid like Cutter Boley, here's what you absolutely better flip and do, Trevor. You better go put talent around him. And this is a very good receiver class. Like I've talked about some of them. I love this receiver class. I love LSU's receiver class. We talked about Texas Tech's receiver class a minute ago. There's several really good receiver classes out there. And Arizona State got one of them. Reed Harris is a guy that Notre Dame was looking at. We're very familiar with him. We've talked a lot about him this offseason. We talked about how we thought BC had one of the more underrated receiver groups in the country with him and Lewis Bond, and he went out and was the player we thought he was going to beat Leonard Moore for a touchdown this year in their matchup. Big 6'5" kid, can stretch the field. They got Amarian Miller from Colorado, who's a talented player. They got Raiden Vines-Bright from Washington, who's a nice slot player, to go with the fact that they have Jalen Moss and Derek Eusebio and Jaron Hamilton coming back. So you're going to have a new quarterback, but he's going to have weapons, and that's what you want to do. You got Christian Ingram from the portal, at tight end. Their offensive line returns 4 of 5 starters. And then they went out to the portal and got a couple guys that are going to battle for that. So, where they didn't need a lot of portal guys to start, they went out and got multiple portal guys to battle for one position. So it's like somebody's going to step up and handle that. So I think the offense at Arizona State is going to be really good this year, Trev. Now the question is going to be on defense. They lost a lot from their front. But I didn't like them for Notre Dame because Notre Dame's standard is different than what Arizona State's trying to do. But Jalen Thompson's a good football player, good, smooth, big-bodied, long edge rusher. Yeah. I like him as a player. I just didn't like him for Notre Dame. Getting him was important. Getting Amarian Winston out of Baylor was a really nice pickup. He brings some potential as an edge rusher. They needed help at linebacker. They lost 2 of their top linebackers. So they go out and get Owen Long from Colorado State. Really good football player, thumper, inside middle linebacker type of guy. And then I really like their portal class in the secondary. Here's the thing about their class. On offense, you do have a couple veteran guys, like Amarian Miller's done, but Reed Harris has multiple years left. Raiden Vines-Bright has multiple years left. Cutter Boley has 3 years left at quarterback. Your offensive lineman, one of your guys is a 1-year guy. The other 2 others are 3-year guys, or 2 to 3 year guys. Amarian Winston's the only D lineman that they got that's out of eligibility. Owen Long has 2 years left. Ramir Davis, who they got from I think Northern Arizona, let me see where to get him from. Yeah, Northern Arizona. He's got 2 years left. He's a nice depth player. And then all but one of their DBs, Lyric Rawls from Kansas, has got multiple years left. So I like the fact that I really like this class. Met their needs, landed some impact players. Very, very underrated portal class. This is why I have Arizona State in the top 25. It's not they have some players returning, but they needed impact players in the portal, and they got impact players in the portal.
Love this class. I really do. And to your point, they fit the needs of what the team needed. At a school like Arizona State, it's very easy to just go out and get the big names. Thankfully for them, some of the bigger names in the portal were also filling needs that were on the roster. So I think Kenny Dillingham did a great job. Look, man, I was sold on Kenny Dillingham as a developer of quarterbacks for just watching what Jeff Sims did to close out the season. He got him to be a serviceable quarterback.
He's terrible.
Bro.
Yeah, he was their start. Yeah, he's terrible. Yeah, he's terrible.
What Kenny Dillingham got out of Jeff Sims, I was like, yeah, you can get him Cutter Boley. I think he'll do pretty okay. Yep. I agree.
Yep. Now, the one thing that you look at, and I was bummed that they lost Raleek Brown. That bothered me. And I don't know that you're going to be able to go into the portal and replace him. They got some kids there. That's the one area that I would say they got a couple FCS kids. That's one area where I would say they probably could have used a little bit of help there and really weren't able to get it. They got a 1,000-yard rusher from, I think, Delaware State. I think that's where Marquise Gillis is from. And then David Abbott rushed for 700 yards at Villanova last year. So that's the one position where I think they could have used some help and didn't get it. That's the one knock on it. But if one of these FCS kids pans out, then they'll be okay. But their offensive line is good enough to where they should still get good running back production this year.
Brian, let's talk about a team that had just an absolutely crazy overhaul, and we're talking about the Oklahoma State Cowboys. They brought in
the Oklahoma State Mean Green, baby.
The Oklahoma State Mean Green brought in 20 some odd guys with them from North Texas, but they brought in 54 total transfers after losing 64 total transfer players. Brian, this is a complete roster overhaul, but I like what they put together up there at Oklahoma State. I do.
Yeah, I mean, Drew Mestamaker was a really good pickup. He's got 3 years of eligibility left. They brought Caleb Hawkins, who I think was one of the nation's leading rushers last year. He's got 3 years of eligibility left. He was a freshman last year. Not only did he rush for 1,400 yards, but you look at his stat sheet, Trev, he also had 370 receiving yards last year. Led the nation in rushing touchdowns last season. They brought in 6 wide receivers from the portal. All but 2 of them have multiple years left. Wyatt Young was the crown jewel of that class. He came with it from North Texas. He's got 2 years left. Tight end, that Donovan Green from LSU, he's a depth player. He's got 1 year left. That's a position they really didn't get a whole lot of older players. Half their 6-man offensive line, actually 7-man offensive line class, half of those guys are multiple year guys. So I think they did have a nice balance of bringing in some younger guys, but on defense especially, they brought in a lot of older portal players on defense because I think they knew that's the side of the ball that needs the most. You got to be able to help us right now. I don't even they've got maybe 7 or 8 guys coming back on defense. Maybe 10.
Yeah.
Maybe 10, maybe. That actually can play. And so you needed to completely overhaul your defense, and they brought in a ton of guys on defense. So, yeah, they had a heck of a class, Trev. How that's going to impact their season, I have no idea. Because North Texas was a great story last year, but that roster is not going to hold up at the Power 5 level. You know what I mean? But he brought some of the best players from there, just like Kurt Cignetti did. That's what he's trying to do. Him and Chesney both said, hey, we're going to follow the Kurt Cignetti model. Bring all my best players from the school I left and then go get some other players. And, we're going to see if it works. But, man, it almost feels gross evaluating this class because it's like, dude, we're talking about 100 players went from one direction or another on one team that either went out or are coming in. That's super gross.
In the last 2 years, Oklahoma State has just had 92 departures from the transfer portal in 2 years.
That's so gross.
That's so rough.
This is just not how it's supposed to be. It just really isn't.
Nope.
It's unfortunate, but that's where we're at.
It is.
That's where we're at. But it is good on offense. They did bring in a lot of guys that can be in the system for a couple of years, and that's going to be smart. And they brought in depth players as well. They brought in guys that can be backups, and they needed that. But like running back, I don't think they bring back a single guy from their running back room.
Nope.
I think they're all gone. It's just the most insane thing ever. And it's not good for the sport. It's not good for young people. But, hey, Eric Moore's going to make the most of it. Gets to completely remake that roster.
The final team that we're going to talk about here, Brian, in the Big 12 is the Houston Cougars, a team that you and I are both high on to relative degrees. We talked about them a lot yesterday in our way too early top 25 ranking, and I really like what they're doing here in the transfer portal. They brought in 17 guys after losing 17 guys, so numbers-wise, let's call it even, but I would argue that the talent that they're bringing in is higher than the level of talent of what they are losing. And there's some pickups that I'm just a big fan of with this one.
They didn't lose a lot of guys that they were going to build their team around in 2026. And I also like the fact, look, we talk about this all the time. Willie Fritz is a heck of a coach, but he's not just building through the portal. He's also looking to build in the high school ranks. And so the other smart thing he's doing is when he does go get portal players, he gets guys with multiple years of eligibility. So you got to get Connor Wegman last year. Took a bit of a risk. Could you turn him around? But if you did, you had him for 2 years. And you had that. You're getting Mekhi Hughes that you're getting to come in, but they've also recruited high school kids that they like. You look at the receiver, Trent Walter, they bring him in. They needed him, but they didn't necessarily have a lot of needs there. They bring a lot of kids back. Amari Thomas comes back. Trent Walker is going to have 1 year of eligibility left. But then you got several other guys that were multiple years. So you got Tyson Turner from Texas Tech. He's a younger guy. But then they went out in the portal in the high school ranks, got Paris Melvin. They got Jeremiah Bushnell, Kevon Roberts, who are good football players. So I do like the fact that what you've seen from Houston the last couple of years. So there a lot of guys that are starting for them right now, Trev, that are coming back that we're so excited about are guys that transferred in from other places. But they were able to bring in guys with multiple years of eligibility, right? So you're bringing back Amari Thomas. You're bringing back, Harvey Broussard at wide receiver. They were both transfers. But you got guys with multiple years of eligibility. You look at the defensive side of the ball, and you look at, Khalil Lufau, who's coming back. He's a good player for them. He was a Washington State transfer. So I do think it's evidence that when you bring guys in, bring guys with multiple years, and then you don't have to keep doing this every single year. That also gives you a chance to also build through the high school ranks. Because the longer you can have portal guys on your roster, the more time you have to then go out there and recruit high school players that can play as well. And so I think Houston has really found that sweet spot early under Coach Fritz, and that's a big reason why I like this football team. Kentrell Webb comes back. He was one of their better DBs last year. He was a portal guy. Jordan Allen is a guy that played a decent amount for them last year. He was a portal guy. Will James is coming back. He's a portal guy. So a lot of their returners are portal players. Brandon Mack is who's got another year left. Sione Fotu is another player they have coming back who's a good football player for them. Both portal guys, but portal guys that had multiple years of eligibility. And I think that's the smart thing that Coach Fritz has done. You're looking at the same thing. The one portal pickup they got from Tulane, good football player, 2 years of eligibility left. So I really like what he's doing. They brought in 3 transfers on the D line. 2 of them have multiple years of eligibility left. So I think they brought depth. They landed depth players. They got starters, and they filled the needs that they have in this class. And so I really like what Houston's done. It's a lot like Notre Dame's. It's a lot like Texas. It's a lot like Miami and Georgia, where they didn't need to go to the portal for volume. They didn't need to remake their roster. They needed to hit some key spots. And I think Houston was able to do that with this class, especially on offense. Really like what they did there. A legit receiver in Trent Walker. If Mekhi Hughes can get back to looking like he did at Tulane 2 years ago, that's going to be a huge pickup for them this offseason, Trev. And, some quality offensive linemen. Drew Terrell from Miami of Ohio was a multi-year starter for them. Shadrake Hurst was a very good football player for Tulane. You're bringing him in. Anthony Boswell from Toledo is a good pickup. And so that's 3 offensive linemen. 2 of them are done after this year. One of them has multiple years left. So Ashton Porter from Oregon was a part of their rotation last year. Talented player, buried behind good players. They're bringing him in. I think that was a very good pickup. So I absolutely love this portal class from Houston for what it was, what it needed to be. They didn't need volume. They needed a couple depth players, but they needed some guys who could come in and plug holes. And they absolutely did that. And this is why I have Houston as a preseason top 20 team.
Understandable. I get that completely. One thing that just kind of hit me between the way too early top 25 and the portal classes that we're talking about today, there's going to be a lot of good college football played in the state of Texas in 2026.
Yes, there is.
I mean, between Texas A&M, Texas Tech, Houston, there's going to be some good ball played down at TCU. Yep. Absolutely.
Baylor had a huge portal pickup, not as a class, but getting DJ Lagway was good. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Rice was a bowl team last year. Tulsa,
SMU,
and Tulsa, Oklahoma State, and Oklahoma, right on that border. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So there's in Oklahoma and Oklahoma State. Where are they going to be this year? But the Southwest it's going to be some real good football. SMU, going to be some real good football this year in Texas.
Houston also has one of my favorite name pickups in the portal on the defensive line. This dude's name is crazy. And I was sitting here trying to figure out how to say his name. I think it's Aragani Igodagbare. That sounds right. I could have completely butchered that, but I remember I had all of my notifications on for the transfer portal. I saw that one.
The kid from Yale?
Yes.
Yeah. I wasn't going to touch that one, bro.
Yeah.
Wasn't going to touch that one.
Aragani Igodagbare. That's the closest that I've gotten. Yeah. And I saw that name come through. But I'm with you. Awesome. Houston had a really good portal cycle. I get you completely.
Yeah, I mean, I think TCU is another one that we could maybe point to, Trev, as a team that had a good portal class. West Virginia is one of those teams that is another one that's like Oklahoma State. They just completely remade their roster through the portal. How's that going to work out? Who knows? But they got Cam Cook out of the portal, which was huge. They're going to be loaded at running back next year because they got Cam Cook, who I think led the nation in rushing this past year from Louisiana. And then they also got Amari Latimer, who was one of my favorite backs. He was committed to Wisconsin for a long time and flipped to Rich Rod at the end. Really good top 100 player, in my opinion. So they had another one that it's impossible to gauge how good they're going to be because they're just completely rebuilding. They're just completely building through the portal. And when you look at this, the quarterback they got but Cam Cook's got 1 year of eligibility left. Their 2 top receivers they got 1 year of eligibility left. 2 of their 3 tight ends, 1 year of eligibility left. So offensively, defensively, they brought in 4 transfers, a linebacker. 2 of them have 1 year left. 2 of them have 2 years left. Secondary, they brought in 6 guys. 4 of them are done in a year. So we're going to be back to the same place a year from now with West Virginia looking to completely rebuild the roster through the portal. How will it work out? We'll find out. But I think one thing's for sure. I do think West Virginia's going to be able to run the football this year. They said running back they will. Yeah.
Well, Brian, that is going to do it for part 1 of today's show. Don't go anywhere. We are getting ready to talk about, we just spent a lot of time talking about what portal classes were the best. Now we're going to start talking about which models kind of work the best and what's looking like what. So before we get there, be sure to hit that like, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody that loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But as always, the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, in part 2 of today's show here on the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, we're continuing with the portal talk, but we're done breaking down like individual teams. And there's a bunch of different thought into how a team should operate the transfer portal. It is, some like to call it a necessary evil in today's, game of college football.
It is.
There's a bunch of different ways to approach it. You have some teams like Notre Dame who still want to major in the high school pipeline, but then supplement their roster through the transfer portal. Then there's other programs that just year over year just overhaul their rosters with the portal and just kind of keep their fingers crossed that it pans out. It kind of begs the question, which is the best? Yeah. What is the best way to succeed? And that's where we kind of start this conversation.
Well, and we're going to kind of combine 2 topics here because the other topic is the other part of this topic is how important 2026 is going to be towards setting a precedent. Because if you look at the first 2 years where the portal was just really bonkers, that'd be last year, so going into 2024 and then going into 2025. This will be the 3rd year where the portal is really just something that is just like insanely big. And we've got all these NIL rules and you look at 2024, Trev, and you look at the top teams in the college football season in 2024. You had Indiana, who was a portal team, and they were built through the portal. You look at the rest of the country. I mean, the highest seeds: Arizona State, heavy portal team. Boise State, mostly homegrown. Georgia, homegrown. Oregon, a blend. Right, Oregon had a lot of portal guys, but also had a lot of homegrown players. Then you look at the teams that played in round 2, Ohio State homegrown, Tennessee mostly homegrown with some portal pickups, Texas mostly homegrown with some portal pickups, Clemson mostly homegrown with a couple portal pickups, but not very many at all. Notre Dame mostly homegrown, but some very important portal pickups. Penn State mostly homegrown, and then SMU and Indiana were portal teams. And what happened to the portal the teams that were like the heavy portal teams? Arizona State lost in their only playoff game. Now, they were competitive. Indiana got smacked by Notre Dame. SMU got smacked by Penn State. And then you look at the semifinals, and it's Notre Dame, Penn State, Ohio State, 3 of the teams that were most heavily geared towards high school recruiting. Now, Penn State and Notre Dame had Notre Dame and Ohio State had very similar philosophy. Not a lot of portal guys, but impactful portal players. So Ohio State didn't bring in a lot of portal guys, but it was Quinshon Junkins, it was Caleb Downs, it was Davidson Ignosin, Josh Johnson,
Will Howard at quarterback, but it wasn't a lot, but it was impactful players, same as Notre Dame. The teams that built around the portal, Florida State, very disappointing. They weren't very good. Texas Tech was just kind of okay. SMU got smacked in the playoffs. Indiana got smacked in the playoffs. And it's just like, look, it's very clear. And then Georgia's a heavy portal team or heavy high school team. Clemson's heavy high school team. They both got beat by other heavy high school teams. So it was like, well, yeah, I mean, you can go do that and it'll make you good again. But if you want to win a championship, you got to be homegrown. Well, then this year comes along. And you're like, well, how do you describe Indiana? They're a heavy portal team. Sort of. A lot of their best players were still homegrown by Curt Cignetti. They only ever played for Curt Cignetti. Aiden Fisher only ever played for Curt Cignetti. He's a portal guy. D'Angelo Pons only ever played for Curt Cignetti. Portal guy. You kind of go Elijah Surratt. Portal guy. Only ever played for Curt Cignetti. So it's a different type of portal guy. So you say, well, okay, Indiana doesn't really count. They're not, I mean, yeah, they're a portal team, but they had to. Their team stunk. They had to rebuild, and he brought a bunch of guys that came with. Okay, fair. But unfortunately, how do you explain Texas Tech? They were a heavy portal team. Miami had a very heavy portal influence this past year with a nice combination in the trenches of homegrown players. Skill, a lot of new guys. Trenches, mostly homegrown. And then one JUCO kid. I mean, who was the big transfer portal pick up the O-line? James Brockermeyer? You know what I mean? Like, and so what you saw this year with Texas Tech, who was exclusively like 75-80% of their rosters portal. And then they go play BYU, all homegrown players, and smack them twice. And so what you saw this year, Trev, was a lot more success from portal-driven teams. Oklahoma, portal-driven team. Ole Miss, portal-driven team. Texas A&M, they were balanced. Oregon balanced, but your quarterback's a portal guy. Indiana heavy portal. And Miami impactful, very much more portal oriented than the Notre Dames, the Ohio States, and the Georgias, just from sheer volume. And this year, a lot of the portal teams had more success. Ole Miss was a semifinalist. Indiana was a semifinalist with a bunch of guys who weren't on that team the year before at Ole Miss. You saw, Texas Tech is a top 4 seed with a completely, remade team through the portal. So what you saw this year was the portal had a huge influence on teams building up and having success. And then there's obviously teams that didn't make the playoffs that also had, heavy portal success. And so what you've had in this 2 years so far is two very different stories of teams that are building through the portal, teams that are building through high school recruiting, and then there's a few teams trying to find that balance. And so what you have to ask yourself is, which model's better? And I don't think you can really know that answer until you look at the 2016 season. I think what there is the portal is a necessary evil for some teams. It's an absolute lifeline for others. What the portal has done is it showed you can win through the portal. What we don't know is, can you sustain success in the portal? That's what 26 is going to tell us. What kind of fallback does Indiana have? What about Ole Miss? How good is LSU going to be? How good is some of these teams going to be? And that's what I think this season is going to tell us. And I still believe right now that building your team through mostly development, which means A, high school recruiting, or B, getting younger portal guys that you can then coach up, is still the best way. But if this season goes to where a bunch of the portal teams, if the playoff is like Texas Tech and LSU goes out and wins the SEC, and Texas Tech wins the Big 12, and Louisville goes out and wins the ACC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then all of a sudden now there's this story like, no, actually the best teams are now going into the portal. And I think that's going to even change what we're seeing now and make it even worse. On the flip side, what if this season is dominated by Notre Dame? and Texas and Ohio State and Georgia, teams like that are still primarily homegrown with some, key players here and there in the portal. What if they dominate college football this year? What does that say to the rest of the blue bloods? Yeah, the portal's nice, but if you want to actually build sustained success, yeah, Georgia hasn't won a title, but they've been in the playoffs now 3-4 years in a row. Yeah, Notre Dame's only won one title the last 3 years. But hey, they've built through the high school ranks. Yeah, Ohio State only won the one title in 3 years, but they've been in the playoffs 3 years in a row. You know what I mean? And hey, look at Indiana. They're transitioning into high school recruiting and they're not missing a beat. Does that change the model for the blue bloods? That's what I'm very curious about. Can you sustain this level of success? Can Texas Tech go out and repeat what they did last year with a remade roster? I think those are questions that we are going to ask ourselves, because you're seeing some of the big portal teams from 2 years ago are not now. USC. Give Chad Bowden and Lincoln Riley a lot of credit. Why did we not even mention USC at all during that conversation? They're not bringing in very many portal guys. Why? Because they chose to bring in 175 high school kids. And they went out and got a lot of portal kids in the past that have multiple years of eligibility left. Jaden Maeva, he's a portal guy. This is going to be year 3 at USC. Wayman Jordan, portal guy, year 2 at USC. And so you're seeing a lot of the blue bloods following that route, but I think that could change if this season we see, like, let's say USC struggles this year, but Penn State completely turns their team around and they roll. Or Wisconsin all of a sudden becomes very good. Or Texas Tech. That may say to USC, hey, this isn't the way to go. This is the way to go. The Notre Dame, Georgia, Ohio State route may work for those few teams, but if you want to win a championship, you got to follow the Texas Tech model. I think that's still, I think, an unknown on what model is truly best for long-term success. For 1 year at a time, of course Oklahoma State had to go to the portal. Of course certain teams have to go to the portal. But is that really the best way? It's like the Louisville debate. Is this really the best way for long, sustained success? That remains a giant question. Hey, Buck.
Buck also has a lot of questions about the transfer portal. He does,
dude,
man.
Don't sweat that. You know how many times Rita and Sadie have jumped up on my lap doing shows over the years, so you're all good, man. You're all good.
Yeah,
we love dogs here at Irish Breakdown.
Very inquisitive about the portal. But this is a very fascinating conversation, though, Brian. It is, because I think now with how much the game is changing, I don't think it's even as simple as looking at teams as a whole. I think that teams now can have levels of sustained success strictly building through the transfer portal. What I mean by that is I think that there are teams like a Texas Tech potentially, and to your point, it's going to be very telling of what happens in 2026. But there's teams that are mainly portal driven that can make the playoffs year in and year out. But for teams like Notre Dame, for teams like Ohio State, the ultimate goal is winning a national title. And I think in order to do that, you have to have a good blend. When I say it's hard to look at teams as a whole, I'm talking about like all positions encompassing. I am a believer, and this may be unpopular, I think that there are some position groups that you can just supplement through the portal. Mm-hmm. I do. And there's been just recorded success of year over year. You've seen it at Notre Dame. We've seen it in Blue Bloods. We've seen it at other schools. Like, teams can have success having a one and done at quarterback. I think you need a specific fit, but I think quarterback is one of those positions. I think receiver could be one of those positions. We've seen that. But position groups that you can't are in the trenches. And Brian, we've talked a lot on this show.
Especially the offensive line.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But in the trenches specifically, the teams that have won national titles year in and year out have been very strong up front, especially on offense. I am one of those where I don't consider Indiana to be a portal team because of Curt Cignetti. This is such an interesting spot because they aren't homegrown to the Hoosiers, but they are homegrown to Curt Cignetti.
Correct. Right.
And that's what makes the Indiana conversation so interesting.
They're the asterisk. They're not like Texas Tech.
Right.
They're a very different version of building through the portal.
Very different. And it's almost,
you can only do that once. You can only do that once.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. But I think that's what makes this conversation so interesting, because I don't know if we get a lot of questions and very fair questions about, like, should Notre Dame do what Indiana does? It's like, well, no, because what Indiana did was very specific to Kurt Cignetti, not even specific to Indiana. Kurt Cignetti would have followed that model if he went to SMU or if he went to Florida State, or if it just happened. Indiana and Bloomington was just the setting in which that happened.
Mm-hmm.
But building up a high school pipeline and developing your players, especially on the offensive line, is crucial to winning a championship. I think you could make the playoffs by getting 2 or 3 offensive linemen in the portal and starting them. I think you can.
As long as you're not asking them to be your dudes.
Right.
Because we haven't seen that yet.
Exactly. But that's
you say Texas Tech, a team like Texas Tech can go to the playoffs every year. But my point is, I still think that's an unknown. Because Texas Tech made it last year, but can you do it consistently? That's a different conversation. And that part of that is like, well, do some teams care, or do some teams say, look, dude, if we make the playoffs twice every 7, 8, 9, 10 years, that's great for us financially. That's all we need. Oh, okay. But then you start talking about some of the money some of these schools are spending, like, dude, that may not be sustainable. One thing I've come to understand when the portal, Trevor, is I do think that quarterback has been more impactful than I thought it was going to be. But it's been with a certain type of quarterback, and you have to have a certain type of personnel around him. You know, Fernando Mendoza clearly showed that, and Will Howard, I mean, your last 2 national champions have been transfer quarterbacks. Prior to that, I don't think there had the last one and done transfer quarterback was probably it was Cam Newton in 2010. There had been other transfers, but they weren't one and dones. Jacob Coker won a title, but he had been with Florida State for a couple years, or Alabama after transferring with Florida State. He'd been there a few years. Joe Burrow was a transfer, but he was a second-year starter at LSU. What Will Howard showed last year is that you can be a one and done. You can just come in, and then who'd they beat? Another quarterback who was a one and done. You look at the 2 teams that played for the championship last year, one and dones. So what you've seen is the last 2 years, the 2 teams that played for the championship were not only transfer quarterbacks, but all 4 quarterbacks were one and done quarterbacks. And that I would not have anticipated. But I think that what you're seeing with a lot of these guys is there's a level of a style of play, but also let's not act like Carson Beck carried that team the same way that Riley Leonard carried that team, or even that Will Howard had to carry his team the way that Riley Leonard had to carry his team. Fernando Mendoza did not have to carry Indiana. Yes, he won the Heisman. He got all the love, but that team was loaded. You know, like his numbers were a lot closer to Ian Book's than they were Joe Burrow's. You know what I'm saying? Way closer. And so I think that dynamic is very interesting. But he walked into a situation that was already established. Carson Beck walked into a situation that was relatively established. Will Howard walked into a situation that was established. And so what we haven't seen is the team that can kind of win a championship with a guy that is walking into a tougher situation. However, you look at what Diego Pavia did at Vanderbilt. They were terrible. He comes in with, Eli Stowers and some other guys, and all of a sudden, just like that, boom, they turn it around, and by year 2, they're winning. But he was a multi-year quarterback, because in year 1, they weren't that good in year 1. They needed that second year. So I think there's all this different type of data that shows, but that's, again, why I think 2026 could be a very interesting, telling year. Because let's talk about our top 25. Let's look at our top 10 teams. The number one team that we'll use my top 25 or my top 10, because we have the same 10. It's just different order, but we'll just use mine to make it less confusing. Number 1 team, Indiana, portal quarterback. Number 2 team, Notre Dame, high school kid. Number 3 team, Oregon, portal quarterback, but a guy that has spent all but 1 year at the school he's at, 3rd-year player at the school. So not your one and done. Number 4 team, or no, actually my number 3 team is Texas, high school kid. Oregon, I just mentioned. Ohio State, technically portal, but he literally transferred before his freshman year started in college. He's like Quinn Ewers. Yeah, Quinn Ewers was technically a transfer, but it was a senior year of high school. He chose to go to Ohio State and play for a year. But Julian Sayin spent the spring at Alabama. Saban leaves, and then he goes to Ohio State. Never really played for Alabama. So I would argue that that's more of a evidence for high school recruiting than the other. Number 6, Georgia, high school kid. Number 7, Miami, 1-year transfer guy. Number 8, Oklahoma, 2-year transfer guy. Number 9, Texas Tech, 1-year guy. Number 10, BYU, high school guy. Number 11, Texas A&M, high school guy. SMU. Was Kevin Jennings a transfer?
I don't know.
I'm going to look that up real quick.
I don't remember if he came in the class.
Years.
Yeah, I don't remember if he came in the class before Preston Stone.
Yeah, he was only been at SMU. He's been at SMU from 22 to now.
Okay.
So he's a college kid. So yeah, he would have only played. He committed to play for SMU out of high school. So high school kid, 13 USC transfer, but 3 years at the school. LSU, basically one and done. Alabama, depending on who the starter is, it could be a transfer, but it's going to be like Signetti. If it's Austin Mack, it's a transfer that followed the coach to the school. If it's Keelan Russell, it's a high school kid. So there's a nice blend there. But what there isn't a lot of are the 1-year quarterback guys in the top 15. If we see like let's say the Final Four this year is Notre Dame, Texas. Let's say Indiana gets knocked out because again, like I have them number 1 because they're the defending champs. If I was making a prediction for the Final Four, they would not be in it. My Final Four would be Notre Dame, Texas, Oregon, and either Ohio State or Georgia. That'd probably be my Final Four prediction. So that is a high school kid, whether Georgia or Ohio State, it's either a high school kid or a kid that has basically only been ever coached by Ohio State, and then a transfer who only spent 1 year at another school. He's been at now Oregon 3 years. Does that change the dynamic of what people are looking for? Because this is still a copycat league also to a certain degree. So that's why I think, Trevor, there are different ways to handle the portal that work. That's what we've learned the last 2 years. Because Florida State's no longer the cautionary tale of look what happens. Because now for every Florida State, I've got a Texas Tech. For every LSU failed last year with the portal, I can point to Indiana. I can point to Oregon. I can point to SMU. You know what I mean? Like there's enough success out there of teams who built a lot through the portal that I can say, yeah, you don't have to do it the way Dabo does it because look how much Dabo's struggling not going to the portal. You know what I mean? And then for everybody says, well, you got to go to the portal and remake it every year. I say, well, I present you with Notre Dame. I present you with Ohio State. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think what you've learned is you can do it different ways. It's about finding what works best for your school. But I still think that the evidence of teams that are good every year for the last 3 years, a lot of the teams that you and I have talked about in our top 10, when you talk BYU, homegrown, a lot of homegrown players. You look at our top 10 of teams that have been consistently good the last 3 years, Notre Dame the last 3 years, Indiana, Texas, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia. Those have been the consistently good teams. Miami's been pretty good the last 2 years. They were more high school driven than they were portal driven. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the counter to that is if Texas Tech is really good again, if LSU goes out and plays for the SEC championship, or Ole Miss does again, like, you know what I mean? Like if some of those teams go out there this year and rise up, then you can say, okay, you can have sustained success through the portal because look what Texas Tech did. They had to completely remake their defense and their receiving court. You know what I mean? And that completely changes the dynamic. And now I think you're going to see even some of the blue bloods are going to now start saying, we want you to go to the portal more. And I don't think that's great for the game. That's my concern.
No, and it's a very understandable concern, man. I get that completely. I think what a lot of people want is just the black and white answer of just do it like that school. And it's there isn't. The correct answer for the transfer portal is blends to varying degrees. The transfer portal is not black and white. I look at it as it's linear. I look at it almost kind of like a thermometer almost. And it's like, okay, you can't be one extreme and only build through the portal.
Right.
Just strictly. Now, to your point, Texas Tech could change that narrative if they make another run in 2026 and have a season like they did. But then you also can't beat Clemson and just like be naive to it and just be like, we don't need it. We got our guys.
Mhm.
We're cool. It's like, well, cool, bro. That's not going to stop other programs from raiding yours.
Right. You're going to lose some players, and then you don't have the dudes to replace them and have fun going 7-6 again.
Exactly. It's living within that range of whatever blend. And on the blending scale, you have teams like Notre Dame who are on the closer side of, hey, 95% of our starters are going to be through high school. And then we are going to have supplemental pieces in the portal, the Notre Dames, the Ohio States, and then
Georgia's.
you have,
yeah,
exactly.
To a degree, I would throw Texas into that, but they've actually done a little bit more portal stuff than those three teams. But they're dudes, their offensive linemen, their quarterback, those positions have been primarily high school.
Yes.
Would you agree with that? Linebacker's been, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at their core pieces that they need that we've talked about before. Texas is more, but I put them more so like in the middle relative to like a Notre Dame.
Yep.
And then you have your other schools like Indiana. Again, it's a weird mix because they're homegrown to Cignetti, but they're not homegrown to Indiana. And so I'll be very interested to see what kind of transition that they make. Mm-hmm. And so it's living somewhere on that scale. It's not just, all right, well, Indiana's doing it, so we all have to be Indiana. Or,
right.
But that's what we see, though.
Yeah.
The fact, I don't think the fact that so many kids are going in the portal and teams are paying this much money for portal quarterbacks is just because. I think the fact that the last two national champions have had portal quarterbacks, 1-year guys, and the runners up have both had 1-year portal guys. I absolutely think that is giving people like, hey, if you go get a quarterback, look at the turnaround Utah had. Look at what Diego Pavia did for Vanderbilt. Look at what this guy did for this team. And there's a lot of teams that had turnarounds because of the portal quarterback that I think gives credence to that's the way to go. Notre Dame did that for a time until they could get the right high school kid going. You look at Ohio State. They're trying to build through high school recruiting. As somebody in the chat pointed out, and when he said it, that makes sense. He was actually a super early enrollee like CJ Carr was, Julian Sain was. He left even before the spring because of Nick Saban leaving. So thank you for refreshing my memory on that, Ben. So if those teams dominate this year, and then you're looking at is there sort of a, okay, go to the portal, but maybe try to do more to develop your younger quarterback? Does it shift it? Or are there some teams like, look, okay, that's cool, but we're not Notre Dame. We're not Ohio State. We're not, you know what I mean? Like Louisville can never build their team the same way Notre Dame does. Never. Because as Anthony Eason, who's been in the chat for a while, Louisville fan, has said, yeah, they're not rich, but they're not poor either. Meaning, at the end of the day, if Notre Dame wants one of their players bad enough, they're going to get him. If Ohio State wants one of their players, if Georgia, LSU, they're going to get him. You're going to have to go through the portal to some degree greater than Notre Dame and Ohio State. But do you have to do it to the degree that you are now, going into year 3, 4 of your program? That's where I don't know. And so what is the one thing about Louisville that can be maddening? They have great wins, and then they just lay an egg against Stanford 2 years ago. Who'd they beat? They almost beat Notre Dame, almost beat Miami. They were really good, and then they go lose to Stanford. This past year, they go on the road and beat Miami, and you're like, wow, it's a great job, Louisville. You guys are really good. Heck of a job. You beat Kentucky 41-0. You beat James Madison by 2 touchdowns. You went on the road and beat Miami. You went on the road and beat Virginia Tech, and then you lose back-to-back games at home to Cal and Clemson. It's like, what are you doing? Well, I think when you have that much turnover, how do you build a culture that way? Texas Tech did it for a year, but can they build that culture every year when they're having to turn over their roster as much as they are? That's the unknown. That's the great unknown. And I would argue that the Lane Kiffin team that they paid the most for was not as good as the Lane Kiffin team where they brought in a bunch of, a D2 quarterback, guys that weren't the big name D linemen like they had the year before. It was more try-hard guys through the portal. That team was better than the one that had more high-level NFL talent.
So I do think this year is going to be very telling in regard to what model most of the top teams adopt and how much, like if Houston is able to go out there, let's say Houston and BYU are the two top teams in the Big 12 this year. You don't think that is a little bit of a message to the rest of the league? Hey, you can go to the portal to start, but it's still the best way to do it is still to build through the high school ranks. Houston's portal class this year looks way different than the one they had 2 years ago. Like that's what I'm saying, Trev. Like, because it's still so new, to your point, there's no one way. And there may be one way for certain schools. Notre Dame is never going to be a team that can do in the portal what LSU did this year. It'll never happen. Not if they want to be good. They won't be able to get enough guys into school. Just won't happen. But is maybe 8 too many? Is 8 too less? Will it vary by year? I think it just depends on the school. But that's why I think who wins this year in leagues is going to be very telling. And it's going to be a message like, hey, you can do this in year one, Lane Kiffin. We'll help you to go to the portal in year one, but we expect you to start getting in them high schools here in Louisiana and in Florida and Georgia and Texas, and eventually go that way. Because at the end of the day, here's one thing that matters, a big deal in this, Trev. It is a lot cheaper to hang on to a kid you have than to go out there and get a kid you don't.
Oh,
DJ Carr is going to cost Notre Dame a lot less than what Darian Mintz is going to cost Miami.
100%. 100%. The whole portal is just such a fascinating discussion because, again, I just go back to there is nothing that draws me back to this is what you do or this is what you stay away from. I mean, I was even thinking while you were talking, I was even thinking about like maybe it's specific to conferences because like let's be real here. There are certain conferences that get rated more than others. But even then, it's just like, but the reason why the SEC will go into the Big 12 and the ACC is because their own players are transferring to other schools within their own conference. Mm-hmm. Like it's just such a wild thing to try to tie up in a bow and say, this is what you do, this is what you don't do. Here's teams that you shouldn't be like, and here's other teams that you should be like. But to your point, high school recruiting nullifies a lot of that. Succeeding in high school recruiting nullifies a lot of that. But we are also not naive to the fact that, look, there are just some programs that won't be able to do what some of the blue bloods do.
Yep.
Like by and large, those are the teams that should maintain recruiting at a very high level in high school. Or blue.
Ole Miss will never be able to build through high school every year the way that Notre Dame does. It'd be unfair to ask them to do so.
Exactly.
Indiana will never be able to build through high school recruiting to the degree that Notre Dame does, in my opinion. Even with the championship, I don't think to that degree. I don't think they can do that. Just like I don't think Ohio State should ever do what LSU's doing.
No.
In the opposite direction. They could. They don't. I don't think it makes sense for them.
Well, and that's another interesting facet to this conversation, though, man, is because you go and think about it. It's like Indiana's never going to be able to do what Notre Dame does in recruiting, but their goal is to be competitive with them. Mm-hmm. In the same way that now Notre Dame has to shift their focus in the transfer portal to be competitive with schools like Indiana. So it's just this kind of give and take of like, okay, we'll meet you halfway here and then you'll meet us halfway here type of deal. I think that's what you're going to start seeing GMs do across the sport is, hey, we're never going to be able to compete with LSU in an NIL competition in that way, in what they do in the portal. But we have to be competitive with what they do. In the same way that an Indiana looks at Notre Dame, it's like, hey, we're never going to be able to go toe-to-toe with you for 10 rounds on the high school recruiting trail. But we got to be competitive. Are we going to split recruits down the middle 50-50? Nah.
Yep.
But can we get to the point where we can pick off one or two in the class that you might have wanted?
Absolutely. Monch and Sales, like they're trying to do with Monch and Sales. Are they going to beat Notre Dame for 4 out of 5 stud offensive linemen? No. They're going to lose 4 out of 5. But that one is better than what they've gotten. And when you've got the best O-line coach in college football, in my opinion, he's going to be able to do more with that.
Absolutely.
So I think that's a great point, Trev. It's can you win enough of those battles? And then what's your plan for retention? I think this is a big part of it because high school recruiting is not just about landing top classes. The thing that makes Notre Dame different, the thing that makes Ohio State a little bit different, say whatever you want about Clemson, but you know what they do? They don't lose a lot of players to the portal.
No.
because they recruit a certain type of player. The pitch is a certain way. You're going to live and die by how you get them there. And if how you got them there was, hey, man, we're just going to come in and buy you. I said this about what's so funny is I predicted this Damon Wilson's career when he flipped. He was going to go to Ohio State and he went to Georgia. And I said, he won't be at Georgia very long because this is kind of kid who's only going to go somewhere for the most amount of money is going to do the same thing once he gets there. So what? Year 2, he says, okay, I'm going to go to Ohio or I'm going to go to Missouri. Goes to Missouri, has a good year. What's he do? Goes right back in the portal. Now I'm going to go to Miami. Well, shocker, because you weren't going to get him unless you gave him a crazy offer. So good job. You got him. You developed him for a couple of years. And then once he was about to hit his peak, he's gone. Well, you should have let him go to Ohio State if you're Georgia and gone and recruited a kid that, maybe isn't as good as Damon Wilson, but by year 3, year 4, he's a good football player for you. But you missed that kid because you went and wasted your time buying Damon Wilson. You've got to be smart about what kind of players you go get. Like there's a lot of kids that highly ranked quarterbacks like CJ Carr that weren't going to be willing to sit for a year and go through a quarterback. They just want to be promised the job. There's not a lot of, receivers who will go say, hey, look, I'm going to go here. And if it doesn't work out for me in year 1, I'm going to bounce. You got to find those right guys. You and I are sitting here shocked that Notre Dame didn't lose a single offensive lineman to the portal. Well, that's a testament to the type of young men that they're recruiting. Some of the DBs that left Notre Dame didn't want to leave. Kind of had to, and that says a lot. So Ohio State lost some kids this year, but that was not typical for Ohio State. And you look at who they lost them to. It was Notre Dame went and took a couple guys. Well, that's a pretty good sales pitch right there. You know what I mean? It's not like they lost them to Minnesota. But by and large, Ohio State doesn't lose a lot of guys. Georgia's losing guys, but they're not losing as much in the portal as they have in the past. They're keeping more of their guys. So I think they've altered their recruiting strategy to say, hey, look, we're going to try to keep more of these guys. So I think that's part of it too, is you got to be smarter about how you're getting kids. And if the only way you're going to get a kid is to just go buy him, then, chances are you're going to have a greater chance of losing him, but you got to be aware of that when they get here. And you've got to have a much better plan for retention. I think, and look, I'll give Mario Cristobal a lot of credit. They bought a lot of their best high school kids. They're not losing a lot of them. They're staying. So even though they went and bought them, there's a plan in place to say, once they get here, this is how we make them feel the love and take care of them and make sure that they don't leave. And I think that's still the ideal way if you can do it for anybody. Look, you went and bought Felix Ojo at Texas Tech. Is he a guy that if he goes out and has a freshman All-American year, is he going to be right back in the portal again next year or not? I don't know. Colorado went out and bought Jordan Seaton, and he talked for 2 years. Oh, these guys aren't loyal. And then, boom, sophomore year goes and jumps in the portal and gets a big deal. That's the only reason you got him to begin with. Why are you shocked by that? So I've used this example many times. If you hooked up with a girl at a party who had a boyfriend and she cheated on her boyfriend with you, I don't want to hear you crying to me in 2 months when she breaks up with you because she hooked up with another dude at a party. Like, what were you expecting? And vice versa for ladies. So I think that has to be a much greater thought into how you're getting high school players. And look, Notre Dame's had to get into bidding wars for kids. But you got to make sure that the kid you're getting into a bidding war with is going to be a kid that once he gets here, for the most part, he's going to be here for a while. As much as you can. You can't guarantee that, Trev. As much as you can. But I think what college football as a whole has to be able to look at and say, there's got to be a way to fix this. And I don't know what that looks like. I don't know what legally you can do from an enforcement standpoint. I don't know a lot of this, but they have to be able to look at this and say, this is not good. People say, well, it's good that players have movement. Okay, let's just grant that the players that are leaving and getting these big deals, it's good for them. It's good for, Miami and Darian Mensah that he can go, that they can basically just cheat and get him out of the portal. But is that good for Jack Nickel? Is that good for Emory Williams, who went to Miami out of high school, put in the work, invested the time, developed, and then just like that, they're screwed over? So Why is what's good for Darian Mensah better than what's good for these other kids? You know, look at Notre Dame. I mean, we'll use our own school as an example, right? The team that we follow. It's great that you went out and got Francis Brew and Tion Gray. But is that great for Armel Mukum and Elijah Hughes and Brennan Vernon and David? Maybe not. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be a way to make it to where it's just not this crazy. There's this website you can go to, and it shows you rosters. And it'll show you a picture of everywhere a kid has been. And there's some kids that are sophomores that have been at 3 schools. And this is not good for young people. It's not good for their development. When you don't like a coach, you can just up and leave. How's that teaching you how to be a man? Well, he's getting paid. That doesn't teach you how to be a man. I know a lot of rich fools. It doesn't teach you how to be a man. You know, like where's the adversity that we all should have to go through at some capacity to become men? You know, well, you don't have to deal with that anymore. Didn't work out for you. So your agent just convinces you to leave and go get a bigger payday somewhere else. They've got to do things to slow this down. One-time transfer rule. They've got to vet agents better. There's a lot of scummy agents out there whose clients are currently basically unemployed in college football, don't have homes to go to because their agents convinced them to go out even when they didn't really have great offers. But there's no vetting process for agents like there is in the National Football League. There's so many things they got to do to fix this. And until they do, what we've seen this year is honestly a lot of what we're going to do, because this was a fun conversation, Trevor, but there's hundreds, if not 1,000 or so kids that are going to be sitting at home right now saying, dude, I don't have anywhere to go play football next year. Now, I only have so much sympathy for them because you chose to do this, but you've got some grown man professionally promising you all this money and all these opportunities to go do this. Yeah, you got misled, but you still had to listen to them. I know players in Notre Dame who are staying at Notre Dame whose agents tried to get them to leave. They're like, no. Or mom and dad stepped in and said, nope, that's not what we hired you to do. We hired you to get the best deal you could for our son at this school. You know what I mean? But we're not going to do this game. But not every kid has that. And I'm not talking about having a mom and dad. Some kids have mom and dads who are the ones driving them to jump in the portal and get screwed over. It's not that parents are this ultimate savior for kids. There's bad parents just like there's bad kids, bad agents, bad podcast hosts, all of it. Bad coaches. That's why there have to be some sort of rules put in place to say, you just can't keep doing this. You know, because it's not good for young people. It's not good for the game. But what it has done, it's not good for the game in the way that it is now. But I do think the portal and I do think that NIL, if done right, is actually good for the game because of an Indiana, because of a Texas Tech, because of Lane Kiffin doesn't have to deal with a roster of 35 people when he steps into LSU. He can go rebuild it through the portal. So I've actually changed my views to a degree. I'm actually more open to the one-time free transfer than I have been in the past. But we can't have kids have been at 5, 6, 7 different schools. This is nuts. And this is not good for young people. It's not even close to being good for young people.
I definitely agree with you there. And that's the necessary evil part I was talking about with the transfer portal. What's so hard about it is you want to have young people set up for success and you want to make sure that you set them on the right track. But at some point, like, I mean, when we're talking about guys that are going into their, like, who's the kid that's now going to, he's like a quarterback, like TJ Finley, I think, is on his, like.
And Jaden Rashad is the same way.
Yeah. And it's one of those where, you know, I know we can't have sympathy for every single player out there, but at some point in cases like TJ Finley, it's like, hey, part of becoming a man is having a little bit of self-awareness and knowing, hey, maybe there's a place that I should just go and stay at.
Yeah.
Whether I play or not. And so it's on a much grander scale with a lot more repercussions. It's kind of like what we talk about with the playoff rankings is there's no perfect system. But there has to be some sort of change right now because what I called the Wild West like 2 years ago isn't even the Wild West anymore. Now it's just bad. It's really bad.
Yep.
It's unfortunate.
Yep. So that's kind of where we're at. That's kind of where we're at, Trev. But I think to wrap it all up, I do think 2026 is going to have a very big impact on what direction this goes. Not end all be all, but if the teams that we think are going to dominate this year dominate, I think it's going to send a message that, hey, look, you can't be up here all the time that way.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. What about Texas Tech? What about Texas Tech? If they don't make the playoffs this year, you made the playoff once and got annihilated when you got there. What about Indiana? What about Indiana? Their head coach got a new job and brought a bunch of his players with him. It was still about high school recruiting and development. It was still about high school evaluation and development.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
and to your point, it's even going to depend on what they do if they get there. If Texas Tech makes the playoffs again, coming from one of the weaker leagues of the P4 and then loses by 23 points again, it's like, I don't even know if at that point we could say, yep, it's a path to success. Like, to a degree it is, but I get you.
Well, and you look at Indiana. Well, they went and bought Fernando. Who thought Fernando Mendoza was going to be the Heisman Trophy winner? They didn't pay for him what Miami's paying for Darren. They probably made a couple $1 million for him. You know, they're not paying for him what LSU's probably paying for Sam Leavitt. They're probably not paying for him what I know they're not paying for him what Duke's or Miami's paying for Darian Mensah. You know, I promise you they didn't pay as much for him as what Texas Tech paid for Brendan Sorsby, $5 million. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, they went to the portal and got a quarterback, but they didn't go out and get the top guy. You know what I mean? Like, who had him as a top Heisman candidate coming in season? Now, you and I thought he was going to be good for them, but we didn't predict that he was going to go out and win the Heisman.
No.
I thought he was going to be a much better player than Curtis Rourke, but I didn't think he was going to go out there and win a Heisman. So, you know, again, it still comes down to evaluation and development. So if Indiana would have got Carson Beck instead of Fernando Mendoza, do you think they win a title? I don't. I just don't. So that's kind of where I'm at.
That's why sometimes you can't always trust some of the rankings and some of the things that are out there. I've been very high on like what our friends over at FanDuel have talked about for the preseason Heisman odds, but Darian Mensah, before he transferred to Miami, was outside of the top 10, and now he's tied for 4th best odds to win the Heisman Trophy. So take that for what you will, but I'm with you. Something definitely has to change. It does. But, folks, that is going to do it for us here today on the Irish Breakdown Podcast. Here in about an hour, the guys are going live on IB Nation Sports Beat for We In, We Out. So make sure you tune in and do not miss that episode. Brian and I are going to be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. for the Friday free-for-all mailbag. But on your way out of here, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know whenever we go live. It is now the bulk of the offseason. So the best way to stay in tune and the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards@irishbreakdown.com. Have a wonderful evening, everybody. Until tomorrow, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.